I want to get into the Tucker Carlson debate because that's what it was. It was supposed to be an interview, but it ended up being a debate. Because apparently there seems to be a bit of a divide in MAGA on whether they're getting behind Trump and getting behind him to rally for a possible strike on Israel, with Israel on Iran's nuclear enrichment program, or whether they want him to derail that and not do that because anti-interventionists got an anti-intervention. And Tucker Carlson was out there really slamming on the idea that we don't need to do this. We don't need to do this. And Trump came out and said about Tucker Carlson, like, Iran cannot have a nuke, kooky Tucker Carlson. You know, Kooky Carlson's actually pretty catchy. It's one of the better ones. But you can always tell if a relationship's going sour when Trump starts throwing those nicknames out there. But then Trump came out this morning and said this to the press. He said his supporters are for him. The supporters don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. And it's not captioned here, but that Tucker Carlson personally called him and apologized for how he was treating him. Listen to this.
Have you seen the Tucker Carlson, Senator Ted Cruz interview? It seems like this issue, whether or not the United States should strike, is kind of dividing a lot of your supporters.
No, my supporters are for me. My supporters are America first. They make America great again. My supporters don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. Tucker's a nice guy. He called and apologized the other day because he thought he said things that were a little bit too strong, and I appreciated that. And Ted Cruz is a nice guy. I mean, he's been with me for a long time. I'd say once the race was over, he's been with me ever since, right? But very simple.
I like it's not policy focused at all. Like, it's just completely like, what do you mean? They might disagree, but they're all still loyal to me. Political loyalty still right. Yeah, that doesn't mean they're not infighting. MAGA currently is having the worst infighting I've ever seen them have, like, ever. I mean, we got the Jeffrey Epstein claims from Elon, and then Elon walks that back. We got the infighting over anti-interventionism. We saw some anger from the MAGA base from Trump possibly walking back on deportations when it comes to farm workers, and then DHS coming forward and saying, never mind. Of course, tariff policy when it comes to some of the free traders, that was an issue too. There seems to be a certain faction of the Republican Party that still supports Ukraine, and it, of course, is with Lindsey Graham and co-sponsoring that sanctions bill as Trump continues to undermine it. By the way, that bill went up from 84 co-sponsors to 85 co-sponsors as John Ossoff signed on as a co-sponsor. There's still 5 or 4 Democrats left that haven't co-sponsored the bill, by the way. The fact that there's any Democrat that isn't co-sponsoring the legislation to sanction Russia is surprising. One of the Democrats that isn't, or independents, I don't know what he's currently registered as now, because remember, he registered as a Democrat for the election, is Bernie Sanders. So if anybody wants to at Bernie Sanders and remind him that, you know, we shouldn't help finance the bombing of Ukrainian cities, that'd be nice. Anyway, back to this.
They think,
but no, I mean, like, look, they're infighting. I mean, they're infighting pretty viciously right now.
if they think that it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, then they should oppose me. But nobody thinks it's okay. People that don't want, I don't want to fight either. I'm not looking to fight. But if it's a choice between fighting and them having a nuclear weapon, you have to do what you have to do. Maybe we won't have to fight. Don't forget, we haven't been fighting. We add a certain amount of genius to everything, but we haven't been fighting at all. Israel's done a very good job of that. But we'll see what happens. The bottom line is they can't have nuclear. And if Ted, I can't imagine that Ted Cruz said it's okay for Iran to have nuclear, including Tucker. I don't think Tucker says it's okay.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Tucker did not care at all, honestly. But I want to watch where this is all coming from. I want to watch Tucker's conversation with Senator Cruz. I'm not going to watch all of this, honestly, because it's an hour and 59 minutes. But I am going to click around and go to the most interesting points. So we're gonna start with, why does Cruz want regime change in Iran? Let's start right off the bat, starting hot.
Senator, thank you very much for spending the time to have this conversation.
It's good to be with you.
So you've come out for regime change
Is it, buddy? Is it? We will see.
in Iran, as distinct just from taking out the nuclear sites. What does regime change look like in Iran?
Somebody else in charge.
How do you get there?
Look, that ultimately has to be a popular uprising from the people. And it's not a complicated question. Is America better off with a country that has a leader who hates us and wants to kill us, or to have a country with a leader who likes us and wants to be friends with us? And
Definitely the latter is better.
of course.
Yeah.
And so that's not a complicated statement. Look,
But let's also throw out there that, and I'm sorry to burst people's bubble, but even if there is regime change in Iran, the immediate implicated assumption that whatever government rises from those ashes is going to be pro-America, when even though, the Iranian public are not too, they don't really like to see women get beaten by morality police. They're not pretty down with the mullah right now. Down with the mullahs, down with the religious authorities, down with the supreme leader. Social media activity seems to, represent that. I mean, how the protests were suppressed earlier seems to represent that. But, and it is a largely young country too. But if there is a regime change, who says that it isn't going to be the IRGC, some IRGC commander that takes over? Who says that it's not going to be maybe someone that's not as bad as them, but they're still not going to be friendly with the United States or Israel? I mean, odds are whatever power comes into place might be willing to talk with the United States and Israel, but there's a really good chance that they're not going to be that friendly with us. So, I don't know, wants to be our friend is a little ambitious.
I believe you look across the world at when you have
Nice.
countries that have dictators that are viciously anti-America. Venezuela, Maduro hates us. Would we be better off with Maduro out of power? Absolutely. I want our enemies out of power, and I want our friends in power.
I could not agree more. The question is, how do you get there?
Of course.
And we've been trying to kill Maduro for quite some time. We have troops there.
I don't know that we've been trying to kill Maduro.
We have.
Oh.
And I think you know that. And
I don't know that.
okay, well, as a statement of fact, we have. So
we do have massive sanctions. We tried to pressure him out of.
I have no clue if we've tried to kill him in an assassination. He says it's fact, but I mean, I don't know of any report that that's happened. I mean, we might have. That doesn't seem like it would be beneath the Central Intelligence Agency. Tucker Carlson has such a long record of just throwing out lies. Remember when he published a Jack Text terror? I used to complain about this all the time. But when he was still working at Fox, right? They were still using this gremlin at Fox News. When the Jack Textera leaks came out, that was that National Guardsman who leaked all of those documents onto the Thug Shaker Discord channel to try to impress people that he had clearance or something. When Tucker Carlson republished that information, not only did he lie about what was in it, he showed the lied documents and these documents that were just completely fabricated. It was documents that were edited in the numbers to make it look worse for the Ukrainians, specifically so people like Tucker Carlson would pick it up and run with it. And he did. And then he ran with it again the next week, and then he never apologized or reeled it back in. This is the type of stuff he does all the time. And the thing is, it wasn't even a good edit. You could see the numbers were like 20% of the numbers randomly cut off. It looks like it's photoshopped, and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. He falls for bad intelligence agency photoshops while pretending like he can challenge the deep state. But if there was a deep state, or there is a deep state, if it really tried, I don't think Tucker Carlson's really the hardest guy to fool.
Well,
yeah,
I'm
there's all kinds
not
of
aware
stuff.
of efforts.
I'm just saying there's a lot of pressure coming from various parts of the U.S. government on that government, and it's still there.
Yeah.
He
just
said it was a fact that we okay, and then he moved. What I mean is, okay, whatever.
Country of our ancestors, Cuba. 1959. We've been working on that. Hasn't worked. So it's. I think we both agree it's hard to do.
It absolutely is hard. And look, I think you're reasonable to ask, how do we produce that? And I think there's a distinction between what your objective is and the means to get it. There are all sorts of things I would say we would be better off. We'd be better off in China without Xi there. Should we invade China and topple Xi? Of course not.
Better off with no national debt.
There are lots of things.
Totally.
But it's good to say, all right, what are our objectives?
Right.
And so with the Ayatollah in Iran, saying you're for regime change, I don't view as complicated. I mean, the guy literally leads mobs chanting death to America. So that's not good.
Definitely not good. But the reason I think it's important to get a little more detailed about how that might happen is because there's military action in progress, which we're supporting. And the president has said clearly, including last night, that he is focused on eliminating the capacity of the Iranian government to produce nuclear weapons. You are saying we need to use military force to effect regime change.
I have not said that.
Oh, I must have.
No, I have not said that once.
Okay.
I don't think we need to use military force to do regime change. I said I support it. I would like to see it happen. You asked me how should it happen? A popular uprising. What I've advocated for. All right, let's step back a second. You and I, we've known each other a long time. I would say we agree on about 80% of the things on Earth.
For sure.
And there are a lot of things, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of foreign policy as much as you want. There are a lot of things on which you and I agree, not just a little bit, but violently.
Well, I totally agree. I was rooting for you in your last campaign, for sure.
Well, thank you. Look, you have been heroic on the border. You've been one of the clearest and best voices in the whole country on securing the border and on the absolute crisis we're facing. And in Texas, I see it and live it every day. In COVID, in fact, you may recall in the middle of the COVID lockdown, I was out walking my dog when the whole world was shut down and we were living in lunatic times. And I called you and said, Tucker, your nightly monologues are the single best thing on television. Like I watch them like an injection of crack. Okay, I'm mixing my metaphor because you don't inject crack, but you get what I'm saying.
Try.
No, I mean, you were standing up and speaking like, what the hell are we doing in a way that we desperately, desperately needed. And so whether it's securing the border, whether it's the insanity of COVID lockdowns and the vaccine mandates, whether it is the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, you and I agree on a ton of stuff. The 20% where we disagree, I do think is meaningful. And it's mostly in the foreign policy space. And what I would say, if you'll allow me to get a little theoretical, and then I'm happy to get specific.
Yes.
For a long time, people have perceived two different poles of Republican foreign policy. There have been interventionists, and those have been people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham and George W. Bush. And there have been isolationists. And then the most prominent of those have been Ron Paul and Rand Paul, and there are others. And people perceive those are the two choices. You got to be one or the other. I've always thought both were wrong. I don't agree with either one. The way I view my own foreign policy...
I'm with you, by the way, for whatever it's worth. I agree with you.
Okay, good.
I don't know who set up that binary, but there are lots of choices, actually.
I mean, people sort of naturally fall into, I think they want to classify people, and they're like, okay, you're one or the other, and you got to be all or nothing. And
Hey, Dylan's whittled you like gutter and sewer chat to glaze you like Tucker and Ted.
Hey, thank you for the tenor. I appreciate that. Thank you for the glazing. I do like the glazing of money. Glazing of money is beautiful. Also, when we talk about like putting people into that camp, you know, Iran deserves to be annihilated. Tucker Carlson, 2012. This is posted by Ted, by the way. So, to show you the tenor of the conversation, the fact that they're still posting about it afterwards and where it's going to go. But also that Tucker Carlson, when he was on, you know, that, what was that show? Wasn't it called a Hot Seat? Somebody's going to remind me in chat. But when he was doing the, you know, cable TV in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, you know, he was what you would expect out of a conservative wearing a bow tie.
The interventionists, it seems, have never seen a country they didn't want to invade, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And the isolationist,
Crossfire.
I think...
The show was Crossfire.
Don't take the threats to America seriously, and I think that's naive, and it doesn't work. And so my view, I consider myself a third point on the triangle. And What I describe that as is that I am a non-interventionist hawk, which sounds a little weird, but what do I mean by that? I mean the central touch point for U.S. foreign policy and for any question of military intervention should be the vital national security interest of the United States. How does this make America safer? How does this protect Americans? If it does, we should be strong. And actually, another way of conceiving what I'm saying, I'm speaking theoretically, but Reagan referred to it as peace through strength. And actually, I think Donald Trump's foreign policy is very much what I'm describing, a non-interventionist hawk.
Wait, are we going to say that Ronald Reagan wasn't an interventionist? We're just like calling non-interventionist hawk is sending how many guns to the Mujahideen through Chinese donkeys and through the Chinese countryside? Like at what point are we just kind of splitting hairs here just so you don't call yourself an interventionist and like look bad on the Tucker Carlson program because you know that, you know, you're speaking to an audience that's not going to be appealed to that.
Where he understands that, and I think this is historically true, the best way to avoid war is being strong. That weakness and isolationism, I think, encourages war. So going back to regime change, where you started in Iran.
So just to make, I don't think I disagree with anything you've said, so we may not be that far apart, really, because you said that the single criterion for making decisions about America's foreign policy is America's national interest.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. Which is also America first. That's another way of putting that as well.
I think it's the definition of it.
Yeah.
It's hardly breaking news
Oh boy. Commercial time.
today.
From what you've said publicly, I think on Iran in particular, you and I disagree. And all right, let me contrast it when Obama was president. When Obama was president, you remember he talked about wanting to have military action against Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I tried to keep an open mind to it. I said, okay, let me listen to the commander-in-chief, describe to me how this is in America's interest and what your plan is. And Bashar Assad was a bad guy. He was killing his own citizens, and he had chemical weapons that were very dangerous. I could conceive of a commander-in-chief laying out a plan for, okay, we're going to go in and say, grab the chemical weapons and leave. Like, I could see that if there was a real threat to America and there was a plan to prevent that, I could see supporting that. So I wanted to hear what he had to say. And I listened both in classified briefings and public questioning. And number one, their public defense of it was incoherent. So John Kerry said, we're going to engage in an unbelievably small strike. I think that's a quote. I'm like, okay, and to do what? At the time, there were 9 major rebel Islamic groups in Syria. I'm like, okay, I agree, Bashar Assad's a bad guy. You topple him. And one of the 9 other groups takes over. 7 of them were affiliated with radical Islamic terrorism. You had Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. I'm like, wait, how is it better to have lunatics who hate us in charge? Assad's a bad guy, but I don't want worse guys in charge.
Yeah, but Assad was also the guy releasing a lot of those dudes from prison, and Assad also hated us. It was Assad that released a lot of these dudes from prison that then went to Iraq and killed our soldiers during the period following Operation Iraqi Freedom. You know, when the insurgency happened, a lot of those insurgents came straight out of the Syrian prison systems, let out of the Syrian prisons straight into Iraq to kill our men. I mean, they're even equipped. I'm not saying that, you know, yay Al-Qaeda. I'm just saying that, I mean, I don't really even know if Assad is particularly all that better than these other groups, outside of the fact that, you know, they might have a more ideological contingent outside of just an opportunistic contingent to work with these Islamist extremist groups. But like, Assad was more than willing to use them.
Obama administration couldn't give an answer to that. And ultimately, when you press them, John Kerry in particular, I pressed, and he would say, well, we need to defend international norms. Like, what the hell's an international norm? I don't know what it is, but I'm not interested in putting U.S. servicemen and women in harm's way to defend one.
Okay, I don't know why he's playing stupid. I mean, there's tons of international norms. There's the international norm around the use of atomic weapons in warfare. There's international... I don't know why he's playing stupid. You could say that I don't care about international norms when it comes to gassing your own people. You can say that out loud. It probably doesn't sound very good. You can say that out loud if you want. Like, this is not something that we should be involved in upholding. But I don't know why he's pretending that he doesn't know what an international norm is.
Amen.
So I opposed the Syria attack and opposed it vocally. And it was interesting. Rand and I agreed. Rand's a friend of mine. But we agreed with that position for different reasons. What I was asking is I think the question we should ask, how does this make America safer? The Obama administration couldn't give me an answer, so I opposed it.
There is I mean, if you wanted to, look, you want me to make an argument if I was Obama talking to Ted Cruz, here's my argument, okay? Iran is shifting weapons through Syria to Hezbollah. Assad released terrorists to kill our soldiers in Iraq. The Syrian government that Assad is the head of has constantly attacked. You can make a million different arguments to somebody like Ted to be in favor of this. And so the only reason I'm bringing this up is, here's the question. If Trump was president in 2012, do you think if he said we're going in, Ted would have whistled a different tune and would have said, well, we can stop the weapons being shipped. We can challenge the axis of evil, XYZ. Of course, that's a different argument than what was necessarily being made by the Obama administration at the time. But it wasn't like the Obama administration wasn't aware of, you know, the fact that that was happening. There wasn't anybody in that circle making those arguments.
I think Iran is very different.
Let me ask what you think of how Syria wound up, because Bashar al-Assad now lives in Moscow.
Yeah.
He was taken out by our allies. And he's been replaced by a radical Islamist who was affiliated with ISIS. So is that a win or no?
When we say affiliated with ISIS, yeah, but then he fought ISIS. I mean, it's like, it's true that he was affiliated with what ended up becoming Daesh, Islamic State in Syria, but then he moved over, created his own thing. Al-Nusra broke off, and then they fought with ISIS. And I mean, like, you could say that that's bad, but there's not like, hey, here's the liberal, democratic, progressive, feminist leader of Syria. You've got a bunch of relatively regressive options. And so far, the government of al-Shura, formerly known as al-Julani, hasn't engaged in the widespread gassing, torture, and slaughter of his own people. Militias under the umbrella of his forces have engaged in certain massacres, and that's bad. But when we talk about what was going on before the government of Assad toppled, and what was going on back in 2010, back in 2009, it wasn't like Assad wasn't doing like big massacres. But we have yet to see certain lines get crossed. Not to mention, the grip on power that Shura has is not nearly as tight as Bashar al-Assad. There are a lot of independent groups in Syria that is going to keep him at least in check. Not to say that he's not going to ever act in a way that is, you know, authoritarian or X, Y, and Z. We'll see what happens. But that's just to say that he hasn't even had enough time to enshrine himself into power all that much. So I would say, like, honestly, and I said this at the time, I think that a former jihadist who was more affiliated with Al-Qaeda than ISIS, to be completely blunt with you guys, now trying to show himself as some reformed image is still better than Bashar al-Assad. That's not to say he's good. That's just to say you have a short list here.
Clear. Look, Syria's a mess, so I've consistently opposed.
But we had a secular leader in a religious and ethnically diverse country. Now we have a religious extremist, Islamic religious extremist, who's overseeing the purge of...
I think just calling Assad a secular leader kind of discounts that. Like, if someone says, I do this secular, and then shoots a kid, like, that's so very progressive of you, sir.
Of Christians and Alawites. Is that better? That doesn't seem like a win.
One of the things you said is he was taken out by our allies. I don't think that's right. Israel didn't take Assad out. What happened, and I'll tell you...
What about Turkey?
Turkey didn't take him out. So it was interesting. I had a long...
How did Assad get kicked out?
Because...
Yeah.
when Netanyahu was in D.C. a couple of months ago, he and I sat down for a couple of hours. He's a good friend of mine. And we talked actually about Syria. He made an interesting point that I've not heard anywhere else, in that he said he believes what toppled Assad was when Israel took out Nasrallah. Nasrallah was the head of Hezbollah, and they took him out. And he made an interesting point. He said it's fascinating how a charismatic leader, and Bibi said, look, Nasrallah was a very effective terrorist leader. And when they took him out, that power base was supporting Assad. And that ultimately, in Bibi's analysis, removed the support from Assad and toppled him. But they weren't trying to take out Assad. My view now, I don't know.
So you don't think that, and I don't, it is very confusing, and I don't know that anyone really knows all the details, but you don't think that Israel or Turkey, our NATO ally Turkey, played any role in toppling Assad?
I don't think Israel wanted to topple Assad at all. Are you kidding me? With all the documents that have, he said, oh, I don't know if anyone knows this. You can Google it, you Neanderthal. The documents have been recovered showing that the Israeli government was working with the Assad regime, and that the Israelis knew where his chemical weapons were, knew where his tanks were, knew where all these weapons were, knew where his artillery storages were, knew where his airfields were, knew where all this stuff were, and they didn't do anything. They left it alone. They had a tacit agreement because they would allow the Israelis to basically go after and even assist them in some manners when it comes to intelligence sharing and going after Iranian proxies that the Israelis deemed were a threat to them. And the Russians allowed them to do it too. They had a tacit agreement with them as well. And that's why when Assad fell, and then a government came about that the Israelis did not have some sort of tacit agreement with, they immediately blew up the chemical weapons, immediately blew up their tanks, immediately blew up their air force, because they didn't have that type of agreement with them. So no, I don't think the Israelis overthrew the Assad regime. The Turks, they, I think, contributed much more to that, because they gave weapons to, the TFSA. But to be honest, the TFSA, they ended up contributing a lot less than Hayat al-Sham and the operation that came out of Idlib to the fall of the Assad regime. That's not to say they didn't contribute at all, but that's just to say that a lot of them just spent their time fighting the Kurds, which was a lot of Turkey's interest in Syria.
I don't know. I don't know that they did. Look, my understanding of that, they clearly took out Nasrallah and Hezbollah. They've decimated Hezbollah, but Hezbollah was waging war on them. So decimating Hezbollah was very good for Israel and very good for America, too. I mean, Hezbollah hated us. I would put Assad in the category of an unintended consequence, and whether it's good or bad, I don't know. I think time will tell.
For the United States.
Yeah, for the United States. I think time will tell the new leadership there. You're right to be concerned. Let me step back and let's talk regime change generally. I mentioned Syria. I also oppose the Iraq War. I think the Iraq War was a serious mistake. And we have a pattern, and going back to this binary of the interventionist and the isolationist. The interventionists advocate over and over again, there's a bad guy, there's a dictator who's doing bad things to his people, and they say, let's go topple him. And you have dictators in the Middle East who are killing radical Islamic terrorists. We come in and topple them. The radical Islamic terrorists take over, and they start killing Americans. In my view, how the heck does that help us? Like, Saddam Hussein was a horrible human being. He murdered and tortured people. Unequivocally bad guy. But it got much worse after we toppled him. And you ended up having ISIS rise up. I mean, that was the cause of ISIS, was toppling Saddam Hussein. Same thing in Libya. You had Gaddafi, another horrible guy, that under Obama, we toppled him. And you ended up having radical Islamic warlords taking over. And so, and it's the question I asked in Syria. Okay, well, what's the plan? And how is this good or bad for the United States? And so I don't think... With Iran, I view Iran as very different from Iraq.
But up to that point, you say we disagree. I don't hear really anything. I'm not quite sure what happened in Syria, but I don't know. So, right. But other than that, I don't hear anything I disagree with at all.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're in a complete agreement. I wonder, though, is there a successful regime change that the United States supported that you're aware of in the last 100 years?
Sure.
Japan. West Germany, probably the two most famous, successful regime change wars in human history. I mean, like, we beat the Japanese so bad they started making silly cartoons, man. Like, I mean, like, yeah, it was pretty successful.
Or defeating the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union collapsing, winning the Cold War. That was the most consequential step for U.S. national security interests of our lifetimes.
Okay.
And
so you would classify that as a regime change that we affected?
absolutely.
Okay.
Look, you and I are in my office. We're sitting next to a painting of Reagan in front of the Brandenburg Gate. And up top are the words, "Tear down this wall," in German, in the style of the graffiti.
Right.
And I think those are the most important words any leader has said in modern times. And if you look at how Reagan waged the Cold War, and Reagan is very much my model for how to.
Okay, don't get angry at me. I didn't bully anime. I just called it silly cartoons. They are quite silly.
I actually think how Reagan took on the Soviet Union is exactly how we should take on China. Now, starting from the point, look, Reagan was not an interventionist. In 8 years, the biggest country Reagan ever invaded was Grenada.
What do you mean,
He was very.
dude? What? Okay, no, okay. See, this is, oh God. So I think Ted Cruz knows that the vibe in the Republican base right now is not vibing with interventionism. And so he's trying to rebrand what is obviously interventionism as not interventionism. Ronald Reagan, again, put guns and RPGs and bombs on the back of donkeys and then smuggled it into Afghanistan to fight against the Soviets. Ronald Reagan was very involved when it comes to the Contra scandal, kind of very famous interventionism and the use of, like, the training of weapons and the Iran. Like, I mean, there was interventionism. It's just a question of how much interventionism, whether the interventionism in this instance was smart and in America's interests, if it was beneficial for the people who live there, if it's what the people want. There's like a bunch of individual questions you'd ask about it. But interventionism is becoming like liberalism to them. Liberalism doesn't necessarily mean I'm a woke Democrat and I'm here to cut off your balls, right? Which is what I guess in Republican podcast world is what it's become. But liberalism is supposed to mean like republicanism. You believe in the republic, you believe in liberal values like the First Amendment, freedom of religion. There's certain like principles that come with that, right? Interventionism is just like you intervene. You believe that an interventionist policy in X, Y, and Z in reference to one country would or would not work. If you want to send weapons to Ukraine, that is interventionist, right? Whether or not it's good, whether or not it's bad, depends on the specific instance. Was it good or was it bad for America to be interventionist when fighting the Barbary pirates at the start of the nation because how they were trying to hold our sailors hostage for ransom? Was that good interventionism? Was that bad interventionism? To curb stomp them and then lead through our example to Europe basically destroying the Barbary pirates raiding, which was probably our first free trade operation, freedom of navigation operation in the history of the United States, by the way. Like, you're treating it like it's a dirty word, okay? And I understand it's not a popular word and you're a politician and that's just kind of what you do because you're a suit and you move from desk job to desk job. That's how you climb up the ladder. You got to advertise yourself, whatever. But I mean, they're just doing to this what Rush Limbaugh did to liberalism. But I mean, he's just trying to find a way to like repackage this, which I mean, I guess like what else are you going to do from within the Republican Party, I guess?
Very reluctant to use U.S. military force.
He didn't respond after the 83 barracks bombings.
You're right. Yeah, he made the judgment that the risk exceeded the benefits. And
that doesn't mean he didn't do interventionism. Intervention usually means boots on the ground instead of just providing aid. Look, okay, I'll Google this. But if I send, the axis or process of intervening to enter intentional action to change a situation. I mean, I don't know, man. I've always, like, if I send like a rebel group $100 billion worth of weapons? Is that not interventionism? Are we saying the United States didn't intervene in Syria at all? Or like we only intervened once our troops hit the ground? Like if we just did bombing raids and we didn't put troops on the ground, well then we didn't intervene in Libya. That wasn't interventionism because we just did bombings. We didn't put any troops on the ground. Like nah, I think interventionism, you know, broadly covers like this idea of military action of some sort, including the shipment of aid. Like if we see a civil war is going on and we provide $200 billion to one side of that civil war, and because of that aid they win, are we going to say that wasn't interventionism because we didn't put troops on the ground? Then what was that? What do we call that? Assistanceism? Like it, I think it's covered by interventionism.
And that's a very rational decision to make. And it's reflected, Trump has made those same decisions where he is willing to use military force, but he very much asks, okay, is this good or bad for America? Does this endanger U.S. servicemen and women or not? And one of the points about the Cold War, look, nobody in their right mind wanted a shooting war between America and the Soviet Union. The two biggest nuclear powers on Earth firing bullets at each other is really unhealthy for human beings. Same thing is true with China. Nobody with any sense says, hey, let's go to war with China. That's really dumb, and a whole lot of people could die. But the Cold War showed we've got lots of tools short of sending the Marines to fight against a regime. And one of the most important tools is the bully pulpit. And so when I say I support regime change, I actually think just simply laying out what the Ayatollah does. And so I spend a lot of time, I speak to Iranian dissident groups. I speak out against human rights abuses. I think shining a light on the depravity of leaders is a really powerful tool that America has.
Should we limit our activity to that?
It depends. Again,
because the U.S. government pays opposition groups, militarized opposition groups in Iran to overthrow the government. We've done it in a lot of different places, as you know. I'm not saying it's bad, but that's very different from what you're describing. You're saying we're making a moral case, as we did for 7 years with the Soviets. Our system works, yours doesn't.
Yep.
And I think we made a credible case for that, and we beat them over 70 years economically.
And that was a huge part of it.
Right. I think everyone would agree that was the main part of it. We didn't beat them in Vietnam or North Korea.
I think Afghanistan was a disaster for the Soviet Union. And, you know, providing weapons to the Mujahideen, the fact that they could shoot down helicopters with stingers was pretty useful. You know, I would say that, you know, interventionism played its role as well. I mean, that's not to say that it was the only thing, but, you know, Brezhnev keeping them in Afghanistan for a decade certainly did not, you know, slow down the process of Soviet collapse.
Yeah. The main part of it, but it was tied to a military buildup. So I think it was two things. It was one, the clarity. So Reagan came in and he described the Soviet Union as an evil empire.
Right.
And all of the intelligentsia in D.C., all the Democrats, all the media, they're like, what a horrible thing to say. You can't say that. Reagan went to the United Kingdom and he said, Marxism, Leninism will end up on the ash heap of history. People were horrified. They asked him, all right, what's your strategy in the Cold War? He said, very simple. We win, they lose. And that was all viewed as sort of a Philistine simplicity. And I think it was exactly right. And laying that out, speaking. Do you know the backstory behind the Berlin Wall speech?
Yeah, I do. Yes.
You probably know Peter Robinson, who was a speechwriter.
Yes.
So 3 times the State Department deleted those words from that speech. And 3 times Reagan wrote it back. And the State Department argued, they said, Mr. President, you can't say this. This is too bellicose. This is too provocative. And my favorite, they said, this is too unrealistic. The Berlin Wall will stand till the end of time. And Reagan said, look, this is the whole point of the speech. And less than...
Who said the Berlin Wall will stand to the end of time? It was true that people didn't think it was going to collapse then, but I mean, people didn't view it as like an impervious wall of communism that is like as natural to the earth as the Grand Canyon.
3 years after Reagan gave that speech, the Berlin Wall was torn to the ground, and it wasn't knocked down by American Army tanks. We didn't shoot missiles at it. It was shining truth and light that tore it down. It was also rebuilding the American military. It was what was then pejoratively called Star Wars, where the Soviet Union there.
It was mostly the Soviet system collapsing and people looking for an alternative, and the alternative was clearly the much wealthier, bigger power that was not collapsing. I mean, that's not to say we didn't contribute at all, but I think that was the lion's share.
Our economy couldn't match our military buildup, and it bankrupted them. That's an example of peace through strength.
I wonder, I mean, is there anybody who was alive in 1989 who wouldn't trade that America for the one we live in now? There's not one person, I don't think.
Oh, sure.
But, I mean, just the basic metrics, debt, suicide rate, life expectancy, I wonder why after that victory, America didn't thrive in the way that we thought that it would, that I thought that it would. My family was involved in that. I mean, we were very focused on it in my house. Like,
yeah.
We won. And I wonder two things. Why didn't the United States kind of declare victory and make some sort of arrangement with Russia that allowed like mutual prosperity rather than continuing a Cold War? And second, I wonder why the United States didn't get a lot better. Like, why don't we have better infrastructure? Why don't we have fewer homeless? Why do we have all these drugs? Like, if we won, why does our country look like this?
These are all great questions he probably should have asked himself before he went to Russia and produced propaganda for them as to what happened after the Cold War. Hey, why does Transnistria exist? What is a first or a second Chechen war? Wait, what is exactly the purpose of NATO post? Like, why did Bulgaria desperately want to join? Like, these are questions like maybe he should ask himself before he goes and, interviews the president of the country waging the largest war in Europe since World War II. Maybe these are questions he should ask.
I walked across from Union Station this morning, as you do, I'm sure, every day. And all these people lying in the street and sleeping outside. It's like, what is that?
We're sorry to say it, but this is not.
God damn, he's got a lot of ads in this.
The political answer, which I happen to believe, is we went much further down the road of liberalism. You look at Bill Clinton, who inherited the peace dividend of the Cold War being over, and
okay, why aren't U.S. politicians focused on fixing America's problems? Okay, how much money is the U.S. sending to Israel? Does Cruz think it's okay? Okay, let's skip the foreign policy. I don't need to hear them talk about why liberals suck at ruling.
Can you see, I mean, once again, I couldn't agree with you more, but can you feel the frustration of people, including your voters, every American, at the emphasis on foreign countries and the threat we supposedly face, a lot of which is fake, obviously, over the kind of slowly unfolding tragedy of what's happening to our country? The dollars spent, the aid packages to Ukraine to pay the retirement of civil servants in a country that we have nothing to do with, the endless.
The thing is, Tucker Carlson is like a snake businessman. So the idea of like, you got what you want out of the Ukrainians, now die, is probably very easy for him to swallow. But to be clear, if we tell a country, and hey, he said we wanted to build prosperity with Russia. Why didn't we build prosperity with Russia? Why didn't we build prosperity with all these post-Soviet states? Well, when it comes to Ukraine, we said, look, you give up your atomic arsenal to this country that some are scared that might invade you in the future, mostly Ukrainians, but everybody else thought, oh, it's not a real threat. Then we'll agree to come to your assistance if anything happens, thinking we'll never have to cash that check. Whenever actually, that check will never have to be cashed. And Tucker's answer to when finally they come to, cash that check because, they gave up their nuclear arsenal and then they said, okay, now we're being invaded. Please come and assist us like you said. Tucker's policy is let the check bounce. Don't say we have nothing to do with that as if like, oh, why didn't we? If you studied a little bit more, maybe you'd know. There's a good chance he does know. And he probably just doesn't care. Either way, if he's like regurgitating like Russian propaganda and regurgitating the Russian manipulated Jack Textera leaks, I never expected like high standards from the guy. But when we say we have nothing to do with Ukraine, but then the next sentence he's gonna fearmonger about the world blowing up by the Russians' nuke. Okay, so do we have something to do about it because of the possibility of World War III? Do we have something to do about it due to the commitments that we made around the Budapest Memorandum? Do we have something to do about it considering the fact that Europe is, you know, pretty stable and we'd like to keep it stable if they're our largest trading partner, which they are, bigger than China? Like, I mean, it seems like maybe they do have something to do with us. And hell, now with the mineral deal, they even have more to do with us.
Support for Israel, very expensive. When people are literally...
I'm not even going to make any ideological, like, commitment. Like, oh, hey, guys, let's talk about, like, defending of a liberal democracy that is attempting to, you know, take steps forward to reform. I don't think Tucker honestly cares, because when he was in Moscow, he said maybe corruption doesn't matter. Maybe authoritarianism, you know, all these concerns about it doesn't matter, because look at this grocery store with stale bread wrapped in plastic wrap. I guess corruption doesn't matter in the system. So to me, like, there's like appealing to that here is like trying to like speak, I don't know, like Chinese with a ferret. It's like it's never gonna understand. It's impossible. It doesn't have the capacity to sympathize or understand.
Buying groceries on credit in the United States. Can you feel like it's nothing against Ukraine or Israel or any other country?
All right, let's stop.
Nothing against Ukraine? Okay, Tucker. Okay, sure, buddy.
You said the support for Israel very expensive. How much support do we give to Israel?
Well, you tell me. You vote for it.
Yeah, it's about $3 billion a year is the military assistance.
Is that the only assistance?
Yeah, we just have military assistance. Israel does not have additional assistance. There's an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, and it's $3 billion a year.
So what is it costing to support the bombing campaign to protect Israel right now from Iran?
So I don't know right now, but I'll tell you this. Let's go back to the touchstone on foreign policy, American interest. Our support, our military support for Israel is massively in America's national security
But what
interest,
does it
and
cost?
it benefits us enormously.
Well, before we can make independent judgments about whether or not that's true, and I'm certainly open to it, I think we need to know what it costs. So what's the annual cost of defending Israel? Do you know?
$3 billion a year.
No, that's the aid. But I mean, the cost of the weapons, for example, the cost of U.S. personnel there, the cost of moving ships to the region, which we're doing right now, the cost of moving tankers to the region, all of that. Do we know what the cost is?
So look, the last week,
Well, it has to be harder to calculate because we're not just like in the Middle East to defend Israel. We're in the Middle East for other reasons as well. We have other allies or other partners, or whatever you want to call them, in the Middle East. So, I mean, like, do we split that up by percentage? Like, we cut it up by like 1/3 or by whatever 1/4, depending upon how many allies or like partners we're assisting in the region. I don't know. But that is actually a fair enough point by Tucker, being like it's not as simple as just aid to Israel.
don't know, and there's some lag when the administration, under the Constitution, the commander-in-chief has control of the armed forces, and so President Trump has made some decisions that we'll know the cost over time, but I don't know the last week. I don't have visibility on that. The annual cost is $3 billion. It's a 10-year memorandum of understanding, and that's the principal driver of the cost. But let me make a point. We get massive benefits from Israel. Israel shares the Mossad is one of the best intelligence sources on the planet. The enemies of Israel, the people who hate Israel, they all hate us. It's almost a perfect overlap. And so if we tried to recreate, if we're just trying to defend America, we tried to recreate the national security benefits of our alliance with Israel, it would cost, I don't know, $30 billion, $300 billion.
So can you elaborate? And again, I'm going into this as someone who's always liked Israel and still does. But I also think at this point, given where we are, it's fair to ask rational questions about what the benefits are.
Good.
So does Mossad share all of its intelligence with us?
Oh, probably not, but they share a lot.
Really?
We don't share all of our intelligence with them, but we share a lot. It's a close alliance.
Do they spy domestically in the United States?
Oh, they probably do, and we do as well. And friends and allies spy on each other. And I assume all of our allies spy on us.
And that's okay with you?
You know,
That's what you're going to go for? Out of all the things that you could... Hey, how is Israel harming our relationships with other Middle Eastern partners? Hey, how is Israel like is Israel dragging us into conflicts? Like there's any other million other avenues you could have gone there, and you're like, did you know Israel spies on the United States? Yeah. Fucking duh. I'm like, I don't want to come out here and defend Ted Cruz or defend Israeli spy or what. He's like, a duh, and we spy on that. Yeah, of course we spy. This is like the most boring avenue to go down. I was in favor of aid to Israel. Then I learned that they spied on us while we spy on them. Never mind. Why they need to know things about us? Why do they got secrets? They're not allowed to have secrets.
What? One of the things about being a conservative is that you're not naive and utopian.
That's actually a good response. Oh God, no, that's bad. I don't want to agree with Ted Cruz even in passing.
You don't think humans are all part of the reason socialism doesn't work is the
What a pivot.
mantra from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs doesn't work. As a conservative, I assume people act in their rational self-interest.
So it's
why the free market
conservative
works.
to pay people to spy on you?
It's conservative to recognize
You're
that
not paying them to spy on you. You're paying them for other. Oh God.
human beings act in their own self-interest, and every
If this is the standard, then we can't have any allies, right? Right?
one of our friends spies on us.
Like if the spying program was like Israel got spies into the immediate circle of the president and was trying to manipulate, like, okay, well then boom, you've got a real scandal on your hands. But if it's the type of like wire communication monitoring as they try to understand the internal logic of a U.S. administration so they can be prepared for the actions the American government might take, that's like, I mean, that's like pretty typical.
Conservative to recognize that human beings act in their own self-interest, and every one of our friends spies on us. And I'm not.
Do you like it? That's my question. I'm not asking whether they have motive to do it. Of course they do. I understand that, and
by the way,
I'm not mad at them. But you're an American lawmaker, so I just want to know. Hold on, I want to know your attitude. Yeah. You said that your guiding principle, in fact, the only principle, the only criterion.
I said guiding, the overwhelming. I wouldn't say only.
Is it in America's interest? Is it in America's interest for Israel to spy on us, including on the president?
It is in America's interest to be closely allied with Israel because.
The answer is no. It's not. Of course, it's not in America's interest. But this is completely besides the point on whether Israel should be your ally or not. You should be hitting on much better areas. There's so many better areas you could be hitting on here, because someone could easily make the argument like, no, that's not in our interest. But the overwhelming other benefits from working with Israel makes it in our interest. Like that could be the argument Ted Cruz could make. Like, it doesn't have to be in our interest for Israel to spy on us for us to also find other interests, just like it would be true of the Ukrainians, the Germans, the French, or whoever. Like the benefit of being allies with Europe, with all of their capital, all their spending capacity, their defense capacity, their ship production, the resources they have access to, the fact that they're buying up so much American LNG, like all of these things way outweigh the fact that, you know, we have some of the same geopolitical opponents, as example by the Russians. All of this way outweighs the fact that like MI6 is probably monitoring some American like wire communications. Definitely in the age of Trump.
We get huge benefits for it, and you want to see the clearest.
But I just want to stop on the spying for a second. That it takes place as.
That doesn't mean you like allow them to spy on you, right? Unless you want to plant certain information on them, you can do a certain counter op, whatever. But you can both counteract the spying and still maintain the relationship, as many allies have. The idea of we're paying them to spy on us. No, we're paying them because we have geopolitical enemies in the region that we would like to see cudgeled, and they happen to be the exact same opponents of Israel, like the Iranians.
As you know, and including on the president of the United States and several presidents. And I just want to know if that's okay, and why is it okay? Wouldn't an American lawmaker say to a client state, you're not allowed to spy on us? I'm sorry. I know why you want to. I'm not mad at you, but you're not allowed to.
Sure.
And I don't care for it. I don't want to be spied on by you. Is that, it's kind of weird not to say that, but you don't seem able to say that.
Sure, I would say don't spy on us. They're going to anyway. And by the way, the Brits are, the Canadians are. Like, I don't think...
Well, I'm not for that at all. I think it's disgusting. But we don't actually pay their... You know, we're not their most meaningful sponsor. We're not sort of paying for the operations of the British government.
I got to say, and this is... it's weird. We're talking about isolation. It's the obsession with Israel. Why is Israel...
Oh, I don't think I'm obsessed with Israel.
Okay, but I think a lot of people are. And like the question, Israel spies on us. Well, so does every other country. Why are you mad at Israel?
I guess... No. I'm hardly the one who's... I've never taken money from the Israel lobby. Have you?
Taken money from the Israel...
From AIPAC.
So AIPAC raises a lot of money for me, but it's actually a misnomer because the people who raise money are individuals. Right. So it's not the PAC itself, but they're individual members who believe in the American-Israeli friendship and relationship.
Is AIPAC a foreign lobby?
No, it's an American lobby. It's the AIPAC stands for the America-Israeli Political Action Committee.
What does it lobby for?
So, to be honest, not a whole lot effectively. Listen, I came into Congress 13 years ago with the stated intention of...
AIPAC tries to get people elected that are going to take a stance that is in favor of Israel. That is getting them more assistance, that is getting them more support, because AIPAC believes that a strong American-Israeli relationship and American support for Israel is both good for Israel, it's good for America's interests. It's like that's what they believe. I mean, that's what they promote, that's what they are about, and that's why they give money to people like Ted.
Being the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate.
Great.
And I've worked every day to do that. AIPAC, a lot of times, AIPAC, I wish were much more effective. Like, there are folks online who are in the fever swamp of terrified of AIPAC, and AIPAC...
I'm not terrified of AIPAC at all. You're the one who seems a little uncomfortable when I'm asking.
No, not uncomfortable at all.
I'm just asking what AIPAC does. My understanding, having known a lot of people who work at AIPAC, is that it lobbies on behalf of the Israeli government.
Wrong.
Oh, okay.
America has thousands of college...
Dude, there's so many ads in this. My gosh. Hillsdale College? Oh, gosh. Fantastic. I was trying to figure out about AIPAC.
For Hillsdale.com to enroll for free.
Wow.
When was the last time AIPAC took a position that deviated from Prime Minister Netanyahu?
All the time.
Name one.
Okay. Let me go back and give a look.
Oh, God. Honestly, that's the first crushing blow I've seen Tucker deliver the whole time. Oh! Ow! Oh! Why would you say yes or no on that if you couldn't follow it up, Ted?
A little history. If you want to do a deep dive on AIPAC,
I don't. I want to do a shallow dive that gets...
No, I
want to get to the core question. AIPAC is lobbying for a foreign government. And I don't... It's not. It's lobbying for the United States.
It is lobbying for a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship.
Okay. It cares about Israeli interests. It wants a strong Israel. That's what it cares about. It's not literally like the Israeli government, but it's like all the people who care about Israel in the United States. They kind of like bundle money and then give it to people. I mean, that are like in favor of aid to Israel, want to like go over to the Golan Heights and like, you know, do a little dance, say, yay, Golan, it's forever Israel, whatever. That's what they do. Yeah. I mean, if I started a political PAC in the United States that specifically bundled money for people who wanted to support Ukraine, that wouldn't be the Ukrainian government lobbying or even lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, as in like I am working on behalf of the government to do that, which is what people will think. It is people who are in favor of the American government being more supportive of Ukraine, bundling money in order to get people elected who agree with that. That can be both good or bad. It's just that's how it is.
So has nothing to do with the foreign government.
It wants America and Israel to be closely allied.
Okay, but it's lobbying on behalf of the interests of another country.
So that's not true at all. And if
it's not true.
No.
How much contact do you think AIPAC leaders have with the government of Israel?
No idea. I imagine some. I think the government of Israel is often frustrated with AIPAC because AIPAC's not nearly strong enough.
Do you think there's any coordination between the government of Israel and AIPAC?
Do they talk? Sure. If you're lobbying for more U.S.-Mexico trade, would you talk to people in the U.S. and Mexico and the government? Sure. Like if...
So I'm not mad about that. There are a million countries that lobby Washington. I like a lot of those countries, including Israel.
But AIPAC are Americans. They're not Israelis.
Hold on. There are tons of Americans who lobby on behalf of foreign governments. I know them. I'm related to some of them. I know how it works. I'm from here. So my question is not, is it outrageous that foreign governments lobby the United States? They all do, okay, including Israel. My only question is, why don't we admit that is what's happening? You're denying it, but it's true.
Yeah,
and
but
why
because what you're saying is false.
Why aren't they registered as a foreign lobby?
Because they're not.
They're not a foreign lobby.
No, they're not. And this is that there's a fever swamp. Look,
it's not a fever swamp. These are very reasonable questions, and you've accused me of being obsessed with Israel, which I'm not.
I actually haven't. I've said
and of being
isolationists
feverish about it, which I'm not at all. I find it's a very tender spot when you ask it, and I don't know why.
So, Tucker, all right, let's go back.
Let's go back.
I was first elected to the Senate in 2012.
Oh, damn. We're really going back.
Came in Obama's second term. And I actually saw AIPAC be badly wounded in a way they never came back from. And the second term is when Obama did the Iran nuclear deal. And the Iran nuclear deal, I think, was catastrophic. And AIPAC went all in lobbying against it.
Yeah.
And they failed. And I was the leading opponent of the Iran nuclear deal.
Oh, I know. They definitely failed, yes.
They failed. And what happened, the Obama White House told every Democrat, when I got here, there used to be real bipartisan support for Israel. That has largely disappeared. And it...
Oh, God damn. Come on. This is the United States of America. Our critique of Israel is we will give you 1,000 pound instead of 2,000 pound bomb. Okay, that's our limitation. Ronald Reagan back in the day called up the Israeli prime minister when they were bombing southern Lebanon and said, "You are holocausting the Lebanese. This is like a holocaust." And then he cut off the plane shipments. Could you imagine any president from either party in this day and age saying something like that to an Israeli leader? Regardless if you whether think that should have been said or not. He's talking about this as if like, oh, in 1980 it was just so overwhelming and the all support on every side, but today the pro-Palestine BDS movement has captured the minds of there's maybe 12 to 30 Congress people max that are going to vote against Ukraine aid in the House. Come on. And I have 30, I think, is being generous.
It's the Obama nuclear deal that caused it, because the Obama White House told every Democrat, pick. You either stand with Israel or you're a Democrat and you stand with the Obama White House. And almost every single Democrat member of Congress said, I'm a Democrat first, to hell with Israel. And then I watched as AIPAC, every one of those Democrats got reelected and AIPAC did nothing about it. And it dramatically reduced AIPAC's influence.
I agree. I watched it happen.
And by the way, I told AIPAC, I said, look, the analogy, if the NRA was supporting a bunch of politicians and cared about the Second Amendment, and you had politicians that vote to confiscate people's guns, and the NRA turned around and raised money for the people who voted to confiscate guns, you know what? No one would ever care what they said again.
So you're making the case that AIPAC is not as powerful as people say it is, and I completely agree with you. I've watched that, and I'm not making the case that AIPAC is all powerful and they're running everything and putting fluoride in the water. I'm not making that case at all, because that's not true. I'm only trying to get to the question of what AIPAC is, and I don't think you're being straightforward about it. AIPAC is lobbying on behalf of the interests of a foreign country, and they're not registered. And you're saying, no, that's not true. You're saying that they don't coordinate with the Israeli government.
Of course, I coordinate. Do they talk with them? I don't know what they do. I can tell you.
But why don't you care? Isn't it meaningful if a foreign government...
Hey, I talk with Israel all the time. I talk with foreign countries all the time.
But the law is, and a lot of people have been prosecuted under this law, that if you are lobbying on behalf of foreign government, you must register. That's it. It's really simple. And I don't know why, if I'm working from Malaysia or Qatar or Belgium, and I'm working on behalf of its government's interests through a group of Americans who are representing the friendship between those two nations, I have to register under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And if I don't, I can go
Wait, okay, but I just want to know the standard here, because if I started a lobbying organization, we can call it like Marylanders for Ukraine, right? Because best state, whatever. And then I bundle, and then I ask the Ukrainians, what do you guys need? And they say, well, we need propellant for artillery. It's a really big chokehold in our production system, which it is. And then I go to Washington and say, look, just give them propellant. We don't even need to give them the completed shells. Just give them the propellant. Save the money on the steel. They've got steel in Ukraine. They've got steel in Europe. The big holdup is the propellant. And I then help to try to get politicians elected who agree with that. Am I a foreign agent? Or if I'm not being paid by Ukraine, I'm not on their payroll, I'm not working for their government, I am on my own initiative, figuring out by communicating with the Ukrainians what they need, bundling, and then getting people elected to pursue that.
Go to jail.
I don't know what they say it's not that important, but then they focus so much on it. To what extent is U.S. government influenced by foreign governments? Oh my gosh, this is a long section.
People have gone to jail, including people I know. Okay. So I don't understand why we don't just be honest and say they're lobbying on behalf of a foreign government. They're coordinating with the government. You know that that's true.
That is not only not true, that is false.
They're not coordinating with the Israeli government?
Do you know how AIPAC raises money?
What?
For elected officials, like what they do, like what the actual mechanics is?
I get that. I mean, they go to people who are sympathetic to Israel and raise money and then send it to candidates who agree with them.
So what they'll do is, so in my last election, AIPAC endorsed me. And they'll host a fundraiser. And they'll host a fundraiser in Dallas or Houston or Atlanta or New York or LA. And they'll do a fundraiser and they'll get someone who will host it. And it's usually a business owner, lawyer, doctor, someone who hosts it. And you get typically at an AIPAC fundraiser 30, 40, 50, maybe 100 people who live in that city,
right?
Who care about a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Yeah. And if they have, 50 people, each of them writes $1,000 check, and you raise $50,000.
Yeah, I've been to an AIPAC fundraiser. Okay. I know what it looks like.
But that is not, and by the way,
there is nothing more annoying to me than when Tucker does that like thing with his voice where he starts going, yeah. I don't know why he starts. It hurts my ears every time he does that. He didn't used to do that when he was on Crossfire. This is something that he just started doing in like the last 6 or 7 years. I don't know why.
No representative of the Israeli government there. You have, when you're in Dallas, you're meeting with...
false and silly conversation. I know all this. The question is are AIPAC's goals shaped by the goals of the Israeli government to any extent?
Okay, that's a really simple from question. Lobbying on behalf of.
It's a simple question. Are AIPAC's goals shaped by the goals of the Israeli government? And I'm just going to ask you a question straightforwardly. And if you say no, I think we both know that's not true.
Hey, are they shaped by?
Are they coordinating with the Israeli government?
Are they talking with them? Yes.
The Israeli government
directing them? You want to talk about FARA? The law on lobbying on behalf of someone.
Yeah.
It is, I hire you and you lobby on behalf of me. I direct you. Does Israel direct AIPAC? No, they are not lobbying on behalf of them.
Ted Cruz is right on the legality. I mean, like, I would love to say Ted Cruz is wrong here because I just like saying the sentence Ted Cruz is wrong. But if you open up like a law book, that is true.
Do they care about them? Yes, but...
Do you think that it's just interesting because what you're now describing in a very defensive way, I will say, is foreign influence over our politics?
No.
And you began, and it's so transparently obvious to everybody. I don't know why you would be embarrassed of it. You've said that you are sincerely for Israel. I believe you. I don't think you have some weird agenda. You seem to be sincere.
By the way, Tucker, it's a very weird thing. The obsession with Israel, when we're talking about foreign countries...
It's hardly an obsession.
You're not talking about Chinese, you're not talking about Japanese, you're not talking about the Brits, you're not talking about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, I'm an anti-Semite now.
Senator, you're asking the question, Tucker. You're asking, why are the Jews controlling our foreign...
Did Tucker Carlson just even stop himself from getting so high-pitched? I just saw him, like, go for his neck. One second.
Talk about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, I'm an anti-Semite now.
Senator, you're asking the question, Tucker.
Yes, he did. He did. His voice broke. I don't know why his voice breaks there. My goodness.
Asking, why are the Jews controlling our foreign policy?
Senator,
that's what you just asked.
Hardly saying that, and I have...
That is exactly what you just said.
Well, actually, I can speak for myself and tell you what I am saying.
Good.
on behalf not simply of myself, but of my many Jewish friends who would have the same questions, which is to what extent, and it's interesting you're trying to derail my questions by calling me an anti-Semite, which you are.
I did not.
Of course you are. And rather than be honorable enough to say it right to my face, you are in a sleazy feline way implying it or just asking questions about the Jews. I'm not asking questions about the Jews. There's nothing to do with Jews or Judaism. It has to do with the foreign government.
Isn't Israel controlling our foreign policy? That's not about the Jews.
You said, I'm asking you.
And by the way, you're the one that just called me, I think, a sleazy feline. So let's be clear.
It's sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite, which you just
I have no clue why Ted Cruz pivoted to this.
did.
No, I just said, why is that the only question you're
It feels like it was a terrible idea.
asking? You answer it. Give me another reason. If you're not an anti-Semite, give me another reason why the obsession is Israel.
I am in no sense obsessed with Israel. We are on the brink of war with Iran, and so these are valid questions.
But you're not asking about Iran or the
If I can
Ayatollah.
finish, you asked me why I'm obsessed with Israel.
Yep.
3 minutes after telling me that when you first ran for Congress, you elucidated one of your main goals, which is to defend Israel.
Yes.
And I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel. I don't see a lawmaker's job as defending the interests of a foreign government, period. Any government, including the ones that my ancestors come from. So that's my position. That does not make me an anti-Semite. And shame on you for suggesting otherwise. And I mean that. And that's low, and you know it's low. So why don't you just answer my questions
I'll
in a
answer any
straightforward,
question you'd
rational
like.
way? You certainly have the IQ to do it.
So, shame on you is cute, by the way, Tucker.
It is. It's not cute. I'm offended. I'm obsessed with the Jews. You just told me
You
that
just called me a
ran-
sleazy feline.
It is sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite for asking questions about how my government
You
is
want to
run.
count how many questions you asked about? What about the Jews? What about Israel? What about AIPAC?
I never asked about the Jews. This has nothing to do with the Jews, whatever that means. This has to do with a foreign government.
Honestly, I think Tucker looks better on this. I mean, look, people have questions about AIPAC. People talk about AIPAC all the time. Do people focus on AIPAC more probably because they're Jewish? To some extent, probably, yeah. I mean, you look on the internet, anti-Semitism still alive and well. But there's also like questions about the United States, about certain lobby groups like working on like in favor of interests that you might as America not agree with. You know, that's perfectly fine. People have questions about that. It makes sense that like a person who gets money from AIPAC would be asked questions like that. I mean, like he would have to wait for Tucker to like give an indication that he could pivot to there and be like, why it's kind of weird when talking about the Jews so much. It just doesn't look strong. It looks weak. Looks weak.
And once again, shame on you for conflating the two.
It looks dodgy. It looks like using anti-Semitism to dodge. That's what it looks like.
They have nothing to do with each other. I'm talking about the
See, again, when they both lose and we win.
Israel and Jews have nothing to do with each other?
All Jews or an attack on all Jews, which I am not, nor would I.
I just got a DM. I just got a DM from somebody, okay? Secret DM, okay, from a beautiful person. Why do most male politicians have such high F-slur voices, little voices? And it's true. And you want to know? I have the answer from it. I have the answer for this. Tucker Carlson was originally most famous for wearing a bow tie on Crossfire, okay? Terribly homosexual. But what we're watching is a bunch of people climb up the social ladder by moving from desk to desk to desk to desk. And when we talk about those who have mostly make up our political elite and those who make up the commentary class, especially for somebody like Tucker Carlson, who comes from big money, the Swanson family fortune, this is somebody who is not only silver spoon, he was gold spoon fed, and he's climbed up from desk to desk to desk. He was never a soldier. He was never like, you know, I was a construction worker. I went out and I was in the trenches. You know, this is a guy who's completely crawled up through pencil pushing on the big screen, through commentary. And so if your whole job is having your legs crossed and, you know, just basically, you know, spilling the tea all day, I guess your voice just gets a little coated.
Ever be undertaken. Now, I'm not attacking anybody.
By the way, that's who Iran wants to kill, is all the Jews and all the Americans.
And I'm totally opposed to that, okay? But now, because
Except you don't want to do anything about it.
decisions need to be made.
We can talk about those decisions.
And I plan to.
Good.
But I just want to get a sense of whether you think, having described yourself as an America First person whose only criterion for judgment on foreign policy is America's national interest, to what extent you're influenced by a foreign government, which gives you a lot of money through its lobby, and you're claiming this has nothing to do with the foreign government. They're not coordinating. Yes, they're spying on us, but it doesn't bother you. And I'm sort of wondering, like, what is this? This is one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had.
I'll tell you what, and I'll answer any question you like, but let's try to...
Are you going to call me an anti-Semite again or no?
Let's try to ratchet down the temperature a little.
You're the one who went to motive. I'm asking honest questions.
I'm
just asking questions. Yes, that is what I'm doing.
Let's try to ratchet down the temperature a little bit.
Picture the house of your dreams. Maybe it's got an outdoor pool.
How many ads can he fit in this thing? My God, this is a money machine for him.
And did you ever see an Eddie Murphy movie called The Distinguished Gentleman?
No.
It's a great movie. It's actually a fun comedy about politics. And Eddie Murphy in the movie is a con man who gets elected to Congress. And he's literally a con man who, the congressman dies, he has the same name. And
Too many people let the shame of letting down the Jews in WW2 cloud their judgment of the Israeli government and their crimes. People need to remember the people aren't the same as their government.
I mean, yeah, people do let, like, you know, past. I feel a little bit the same way about the Russians sometimes, and I understand what you're getting at, but it was a pretty historic letdown. I mean, we when it comes to like anti-Semitism, we were amongst the world champions. Of course, the Germans, you know, they were, you know, back-to-back champs. But I mean, we just constantly off the backboard. Like there were Jews fleeing to our country in a boat, and they were on our shore, like, please let us in. And we're just like, nah, go. And then many of them would end up being killed in the Holocaust. It was like a pretty historic, like just face plant when it comes to humanitarianism. So it makes sense that people would have that sympathy. I just don't one-to-one say that the policy of the Israeli government is necessarily even connected to that. I can say that the people who live in Israel can be connected to that because many of those were Holocaust survivors who fled to Israel, or other Jews who fled pogroms around the world. But that doesn't necessarily translate to like the actions of the Israeli government. But I feel a similar way sometimes when we talk about Russia, because when I look at Clinton, George Bush, and Obama era Russia policy, it was all set, I feel like, in this image of, well, the Russians have been wounded. They were an empire, then they were knocked down, so we have to be gentle with them and their egos and what they're going through. And so when they invaded Moldova, we were like, well, you know, these types of things happen. And when they invaded Chechnya, and then they invaded again, and then they invaded Georgia, and then they invaded Ukraine. And when they invaded Ukraine, after invading all those other countries in 2014, that was in the midst of what? It was in the midst of this. One second, let me pull this up. In the midst of the great reset that Obama wanted. Hey, let's get Hillary Clinton to stand next to Lavrov, who now is basically justifying war crimes on the daily against my friends, right? Sorry to make it personal. And let's have them stand in this press conference room and say, we're just going to forget all the crimes committed and reset everything and press this button. Wow. Isn't that beautiful? My gosh. The Russians would invade Ukraine 5 years later.
In anticipation of this important meeting and our time.
By the way, this was 1 year after they invaded Georgia. 1 year.
Here together, I wanted to present you with a little gift which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying, and that is we want to reset our relationship. And
let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
Then,
thank you very much.
When the Russians did invade, and this guy justified it the whole time, the most Obama could muster in defense of the Ukrainians was radar systems so the Ukrainians could watch the bombs fly in and hit their cities and hit their towns and hit their villages and hit their units. And Obama refused to give the Ukrainians anything lethal, anything that could shoot and fire and to defend the towns. And he failed, in my mind, to deliver upon the commitment we made to Ukraine in the 90s, when we said we would come to their assistance after they gave up their atomic arsenal. And so, you know, I get what you're talking about, of like a certain amount of like sympathy clouding judgment. But I mean, oh man, sorry, that great reset, it gave me a little bit of a migraine. Let me just get back to the debate.
And so he runs and they get elected. And there's a scene in the movie where Eddie Murphy is a freshman member of Congress, and he's sitting down with a sleazy lobbyist. And he's asking the lobbyist, all right, what should my positions be on, I think they were talking about power plants and electrical transmission lines. And the lobbyist's like, well, what do you believe? And Eddie Murphy's the comment said, I don't care. Whatever gets me the most money. I'll do whatever gets me the most money. And the lobbyist says, no, pick a side. Doesn't matter what you pick. If you pick one side, we'll go shake down everyone who supports that side and they'll give you money. If you pick the other side, that's fine. We'll just go to the other side and shake down that. That's a little bit the way it works. And you often get leftists in the media who say, for example, if you support the Second Amendment, as you do and I do, well, you're just bought and paid for by the NRA. And that actually is backwards. I believe in the Second Amendment because I believe in the Constitution. Now, am I proud that the NRA supports me? Sure, because people who care about the Second Amendment want to support leaders who fight for it. But it gets it backward. Look, AIPAC, when I ran for the Senate, AIPAC didn't support me. I supported Israel before they supported me. I'm happy to have their support because they share my objective.
No, but you're missing it. I'm not suggesting that you're bought and paid for. I'm not saying that.
I want to go back and take
sincere.
I want to go back and take the transcript because you just said a minute ago, I'm slightly paraphrasing, but are you lobbying for a foreign government because they pay you a lot of money? That's basically what you said. So you are suggesting that.
Let me just be clear about what I think. Your views seem totally sincere.
Yes.
You take money from people who agree with you.
Yeah.
I believe that. I
take money from people who disagree with me.
I'm only trying to get to the question of to what extent is the U.S. government influenced by other governments? And it's a lot.
Of course.
It's hardly just Israel. It's hardly just Israel. I don't think Israel's the main one. There are lots of governments. China is a massive influence on this city.
And it's a huge problem.
As you know, I couldn't agree more. And there are lots of other. The UK, which is a truly sinister place, in my opinion, as a ethnic Brit, I can say. I think that's my view. Maybe you disagree.
I think they're on the wrong path. I love the Brits, but their government is gone off the rails.
Without even getting into that, I'm just saying I don't think Israel's the only one. But it's the only one where you're instantly called an anti-Semite for asking questions. And it's also the only government that no one will ever criticize. And
people
I find
criticize Israel every minute of every day. Like the only government that people will not criticize, Rashida Tlaib just tweeted out calling Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal.
Rashida Tlaib? No,
you said no one will criticize.
No, I'm talking about Republicans that I would vote for, including you. And I'm saying, whatever. I don't even like talking about Israel. What I care about, I never do because it's not worth being called anti-Semites from AIPAC recipients. But now we are on the verge of joining a war, and I just want to be clear about why we're doing this.
All right, so, and let's get into Iran momentarily, but
why does nobody in this conversation have a neck?
You suggested it was a strange thing that I said a minute ago, that when I came into the Senate, I resolved that I was going to be the leading defender of Israel. And what you didn't ask is why. So let me tell you why.
No, you said I was obsessed with Israel, and you had just told me that, like, your driving motive to get to the Senate was to defend Israel. I'm like, I don't think I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel.
Okay.
I don't even think about Israel.
Tucker, words matter.
Uh-huh.
And you know that. I said I resolved to be the leading defender of Israel, and you said your driving motive, the reason you're in the Senate.
You want to be the leading defender of Israel. I would think if I ran for Senate, I'd be like, there are people dying of drug ODs on the street.
My driving motive is to fight for Texas and America, and to fight for jobs, and to fight for the Constitution. And you played a very, very careful word game of eliding.
You're the one who said it, not me.
So you still haven't asked why, but I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
And the reason is twofold. Number one, as a Christian, growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Of those who bless the government of Israel?
Those who bless Israel is what it says. It doesn't say the government of, it says the nation of Israel. So That's in the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture off the tip of my... You pull out the phone and use the Google.
It's in Genesis. But so you're quoting a Bible phrase. You don't have context for it and you don't know where in the Bible it is, but that's like your theology? I'm confused. What does that even mean?
Tucker is being such a petty little bitch here, and I kind of love it. Just as like, oh, that's interesting. You don't really know the thing that you say underpins everything, you know? And you say this is like really fundamental for you. You really like love this Israel thing, but like you don't even remember where it's in the like the lore. I don't know. I'm just saying, kind of sounding like a fake fan. Kind of sounding like you're posing a little bit.
Tucker.
I'm a Christian. I want to know what you're talking about.
Okay. Where does my support for Israel come from? Number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two...
Hold on.
I'm not holding on.
Hold on. You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel. And what
does that mean, Israel?
We're told those who bless Israel will be blessed.
But hold on, define Israel. This is important. Are you kidding? This is a majority Christian country.
Define Israel? Do you not know what Israel is? That would be the country you've asked like 49 questions about.
So that's what Genesis, that's what God is talking about.
The nation of Israel, yes.
So is that the current borders, the current leadership? He's talking about the political entity called Israel?
He's talking about the nation of Israel. Yeah, nations exist, and he's discussing a nation. A nation was the people of Israel.
Is the nation
They're the
God
descendants
is
of
referring
Abraham.
to in Genesis, is that the same as the country run by Benjamin Netanyahu right now?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
And by the way, it's not run by Benjamin Netanyahu as a dictator. It's a democratic country that elected...
He's the prime minister.
Right.
What?
But just like... You know, America is the country.
I will say, Ted does seem nervous on this topic. I don't know why I threw the dictator thing. He does seem nervous on this. He does seem a little shifty. Seems a little uncomfortable.
By Donald Trump. No, actually, the American people elected Donald Trump. The same principle
This is silly. I'm talking about the political entity of modern Israel.
Yes, and that is
You believe
Israel.
That's what God was talking about in Genesis.
I do, but
that country's existed since when?
For thousands of years. Now, there was a time when it didn't exist, and then it was recreated just over 70 years ago.
I'm saying, I think most people understand that line in Genesis to refer to the Jewish people, God's chosen people.
That's not what it says.
Okay, Israel, but you don't even know where in the Bible it is. So I don't know if we can...
I don't remember the scriptural citation. But, okay, It's
like Genesis 16 or something like that. But yes, it's in the earlier part of the book. But the point is...
All right, Tucker, you keep interrupting me before I finish my sentence.
It's just important to know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're... So you're saying as a Christian, if I believe in Jesus, I have to support the modern state of Israel?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm explaining for me what my motivation is.
But okay, so I'm just trying to understand. You said God tells you to support the modern state of Israel in the Bible, in some place in the Bible that you heard about, but you don't know where it is. That's your theology?
You're going back, am I a sleazy feline again? I mean...
If you accuse me of anti-Semitism again, I will say that, but I don't think you will.
Try to be a little less condescending. I'm trying to have a conversation.
Condescending. You're throwing this stuff out, and it's my job to figure out what you're talking about, but I don't understand.
But you're not letting me...
Okay. I'm sorry. I want to be polite.
That is, for me, a personal motivation. But I also, what I was about to say, I don't believe my personal faith, not everyone who I represent is a Christian. It's not an argument for me to give that we should do this because of my faith. And so as an elected official, I don't give that as the reason we should support Israel. That is a personal motivation for me, but I don't think it is the reason we should. The reason that I am the leading defender of Israel is because Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East, an incredibly troubled part of the world, and supporting Israel benefits America. And the clearest illustration of that is what is happening right now. Let me just make this point, and then...
Okay, and then I'll just ask what you mean. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, Iran, I think the most acute national security threat facing America right now
after Assad fell? After Hezbollah got their teeth kicked in? And I mean, like, China, I can, like, buy. Russia, I mean, like, they have an atomic arsenal. They started the largest war in Europe since World War II. You know, where our main trading partner is, you know, Europe, the EU. Iran, I mean, like, they're a security opponent of the United States. They're like, they're on the undercard of the matches, you know. The main security threat right now. Maybe I even would have bought that more, I don't know, 4 years ago. But now, post Assad fall, post Hezbollah getting clocked as Hamas's ruins of what it formerly was. I mean, the Houthis are the ones that ended up being the sturdiest. Strange how that ended up being. Really? Okay. Okay. What do I know?
Is the threat of a nuclear Iran. I think China is the biggest long-term threat, but acute and near-term is a nuclear Iran.
Okay.
And
okay, but what about the active largest ground war in the world? Okay, whatever. Whatever. We don't need to rank all this. He's ranking it for whatever. I mean, you know, we don't need to rank it.
I think Israel is doing a massive favor to America right now by trying to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. And the reason I view Iran differently, we talked before about Iraq. I opposed the Iraq war. We talked about Syria. I opposed military intervention in Syria. The reason for that is those did not pose a threat to the United States. I think Iran is markedly different. Number one, the Ayatollah is a religious zealot. He is a lunatic, but a particularly dangerous kind of lunatic because he's driven by religious fervor. When he says death to America.
If you say, I want to support a country mainly personally because the Bible said so, does that make you a religious zealot? That's an open question. That's a question mark I'm putting out for everyone, genuinely.
America and death to Israel, I believe him. And I think Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon because there is a very real possibility they would use a nuclear weapon. So you want to ask, how does supporting Israel benefit us? Right now, this tiny little country, the size of the state of New Jersey, is fighting our enemies for us and taking out their top military leadership and trying to take out their nuclear capacity. That makes America much safer.
So the president has said repeatedly Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon,
yes,
and he will do whatever it takes to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He said that like 100 times. He clearly means it. I think he will use force to effect that if he feels he has to. I think he's been really clear about that. I don't know, but it seems that way. Do you feel that? Do you think that's correct?
Whether he would use force to stop a nuclear weapon, I think he has put that option on the table.
He certainly suggested. I mean, I have literally no idea what's going to happen, but just reading his statements, he's made that really clear.
So what he has been very clear about, and I spoke with the president on Sunday, is he has been very clear to Iran that if they attack U.S. servicemen and women, there will be real consequences and I think very serious military response.
By the way, this is a sidebar, but I just can't resist. The Prime Minister of Israel said that Iran tried to assassinate Donald Trump twice.
Yeah, I read your newsletter this morning,
But do you believe that's true?
Again, I think it was sort of a word game. What is true is Iran is trying to assassinate Donald J. Trump, and they have hired hitmen. Now, you pointed out...
No, he said that they have tried twice to kill him, and I don't know that... I don't have any evidence that's true, but I sort of wonder if that is true. Why aren't we at war with them already?
Okay. And I read your newsletter this morning, and I thought it was playing word games to draw a political point.
How's that a word game? It's my president. And
can I tell you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. You rightly pointed out there's no evidence that this clown in Butler, Pennsylvania, who shot the president was working for the Iranians. I don't think he was. There's no evidence of that. Although I would like to know more about who he was and what's going on. But I don't find it
if there's anything these two like doing is asking questions.
Plausible that he was working for the Iranians. So was that caused by the Iranians? No. But what is true, and what your newsletter didn't acknowledge, is it true or false that Iran is currently trying to murder Donald J. Trump and has paid hitmen to do so?
Well, that's the question, and I don't know. The Butler, Pennsylvania thing.
Butler, Pennsylvania.
Let's just put that aside. I don't know.
So Netanyahu misspoke when he said those two assassinations were because of Iran.
Calling the kettle black in regards to that religious zealot comment.
Yeah, well, you know, I just do my best to add my voice to speak up for you chatters, even if you're from disgusting, degenerate, downtrodden in the gutter YouTube chat. Thank you, C. Roy, for the sixer.
But what he was saying that is right is they're actively trying to murder Donald J. Trump.
Is there, okay, so you're aware of a plot to kill Trump?
Yes, that Iran is paying for. And by the way,
when?
It has been over the last, I'd say, 18 months to 2 years.
In the United States?
In the United States, yes. And let me point out.
Has anyone been arrested?
For the Trump attempted assassination, no. But they are also actively paying Iranian hitmen to murder Mike Pompeo when he was President Trump's first Secretary of State, the first term, rather. John Bolton.
The Iranians have tried to kill like different U.S. figures and like Iranian activists, like diaspora activists and such. They have tried to do that. That is true. There's like video footage of an Iranian activist in her home as like an assassin walks up to the door and like bangs on it. It's like looking for him, trying to kill him. It's pretty scary. And they did try to. I think there is definitely something to the attempt on John Bolton's life. Didn't get anywhere, but as for the president, I actually don't know for sure. One second. Let me read this. Speaking on the special... In November of 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment charging Fareed Zakaria, believed to be operating on behalf of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, with plotting to assassinate Trump. Prosecutors allege that Zakaria, while in Tehran, conducted multiple interviews with the FBI in which he admitted being tasked with surveilling and killing Trump in the months before the 2024 presidential election. The criminal complaint states that Zakaria was instructed by a senior IRGC official in September 2024 to prioritize the Trump plot over other assignments. Trump killed Soleimani and they never forgave him for it. It's a criminal complaint, though. I don't know if all the evidence has been presented publicly yet. The DOJ confirmed that he had enlisted 2 U.S.-based men in parallel plots to kill Iranian American activist Masheed Alanji. I think that's true. I think that's Masheed Alijad. Yeah, that's the woman I was thinking of. Yeah, Masheed Alijad. Yeah. She did Voice of America, Persia.
Bolton, when John Bolton was National Security Advisor to President Trump, and a guy named Brian Hook, who was Assistant Secretary of State.
Right.
During the Biden administration...
Wait, but hold on. Can we go back to Donald Trump because he's the president? No, it's a big deal. What do you mean? When no one has been arrested for these assassination attempts on Trump.
Yes.
They've hired hitmen. How do we know that?
All right, let me...
I just read that somebody was arrested, actually. So... I can't believe I'm better at making Trump the victim than Tucker Carlson.
Let me break it down. People have been arrested. So the reason I brought up Pompeo, Bolton, and Hook, who are under active assassination attempts because of their service in the first Trump administration, under the Biden
administration... Well, they say that. I've never seen any evidence of it.
Can I give you the evidence?
Well, let's just stick with Trump.
No, because these are interrelated. So let me make a bloody point. Under the Biden administration, the State Department was spending $2 million a month providing security for Pompeo, Bolton, and Hook. And they did arrest Iranian hitmen at John Bolton's apartment complex who rented, I think, the apartment next to him and were actively trying to assassinate him, and they went and arrested them. So, yes, they caught Iranian hitmen. Now, it so happens Iran's not very good at it. And so they are actively trying. And in fact,
Iran has tried like a lot of weird, wacky plots in the United States. Most of them fail. Their tentacles don't really reach that deep into the States.
But what about Trump? He's the president. If there's an...
hate to do the tentacle comparison, but I don't know what else to say. Long Iranian arm, I guess.
Plot to kill Trump by the Iranians.
Okay, so you dispute that the Iranians are trying to kill Trump?
Of course. I mean, that's the most important question. The Prime Minister of Israel just said there have been 2 assassination attempts against Donald Trump by the Iranians. And I think it's a very fair question, maybe you disagree, to ask, what are you talking about?
Okay, and I agree with you that he misspoke.
So there weren't those 2 attempts?
There were 2 attempts, but the clown in Butler, Pennsylvania, and the other guy on the golf course were not connected to the Iranians. That's the part that he misspoke. But by the way, when you speak all the time, occasionally, what he said that was accurate is that Iran is actively trying to murder Donald J. Trump and has paid hitmen.
Okay, but right, okay, that's fine.
And he was
but
conflating it with the two attempts.
I understand. But I just want to pull that thread because it's so important. I voted for Donald Trump. I campaigned for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's our president. And we're on the cusp of a war. So if there's evidence that Iran paid hitmen to kill Donald Trump and is currently doing that,
Well, the idea that they're currently doing that, I have no clue. The DOJ thing just seems to be about, this guy trying to enlist people here to take out different officials.
Like, what are you even talking? I've never heard that before.
Okay.
Where's the evidence? Who are these people? Why haven't they been arrested? Why are we not at war with Iran?
That's a great question to ask.
How do you know that that's true?
We know that it's true because we have been told that by the military and our intelligence community for the last 2 years.
And the DOJ.
We meaning who?
Congress has and the public. I mean, we've had multiple testimonies. I can send you testimony.
Do we know the names of the people or where this happened or what they tried to do to kill Trump?
It's all right in this article that's on my other screen. It's Shikari. Shikari is his name.
We have not apprehended an Iranian hitman trying to kill him. We know that Iran is trying to do so.
In the United States?
Yes. And by the way, like Iran...
This just seems like a huge headline, and you're acting like everyone knows this. I didn't know that.
Iran put out a whole video about murdering Trump.
Right, but I've never heard evidence that there are hitmen in the
They did. It was very strange. It was like a drone killing him on a golf course.
United States. I mean, trying to kill Trump right now, we should have a nationwide dragnet on this, and we should attack Iran immediately if that's true. Don't you think?
No.
If they're trying to assassinate our president?
They have been for 2 years.
Then why are we at war with them?
Well, we are trying to
Why don't we just nuke Tehran if they're trying to murder our president? There's nothing that you could do that would be worse for the United States than murdering Trump. And I just don't understand why you're not calling for the use of nuclear weapons against the Ayatollah right now. I'm serious. If you really believe they're trying to murder...
The use of nuclear weapons... See,
whatever
that's part
it
of the
takes.
problem of...
So what do you mean? You don't seem to take the allegations seriously. I do. If you believe they're trying to murder Trump, we need to stop what we're doing and punish them.
So Tucker's... So Tucker's position is we need to nuke Tehran. Why? Okay. Why not? I mean, even if it was... Okay, let's say that it's all true and they're still trying to do it when it could be, now that he's president of the United States, they've decided probably not a good idea, just going to piss him off, or let's stop, right? Which is probably likely, honestly, in my opinion. But let's say they don't. Didn't Trump just say he knows what the Ayatollah is? Why would you nuke Iran and destroy the atomic standard when you could just do a reciprocal strike?
Can I ask something? And I mean this sincerely. So, all right, 20 years ago, you were, I think it's fair to say, in the interventionist world. You were a vocal,
big time.
You were a vocal defender of the Iraq War.
I was a promoter of the Iraq War.
And you now, and look, I think you were mistaken. I think you were mistaken. That's okay. Look, people change and learn, and that's part of the journey of being human. Your views have moved, though. In my view, they've gone way too far the other end. And so I'm just
totally
really
confused.
why.
I'm saying, hold on. Wait, this is one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had. I'm saying if it's true that Iran is trying to murder Trump, we need to move militarily against Iran immediately. That's not isolationism. That's that's a call to violence, which I am calling for. If we believe that Iran is trying to murder our president, we need to strike Iran.
Okay, but isolationists say things like, well, then just nuke them, which is what you just said, which is kind of a weird...
Because I'm upset, because I'm taking you seriously. You don't take your own statements seriously.
I take my statements very seriously.
So I've asked you, where's the evidence this is true? And you've said, well, they're trying to assassinate Brian Hook or something, which I'm against, by the way. I'm against hurting any American, period, no matter...
So do you dispute that they're trying to murder
I'm not disputing it at all.
and Bolton?
I'm not disputing it at all.
They literally arrested the hitman with Bolton.
I don't know why that's even relevant. I'm asking about the president of the United States.
Wait, it's not relevant that Iran hired hitmen to murder cabinet members in Trump's administration? That doesn't go to
I've already
how credible
said
is it that they're willing to spend
totally
money to do that?
Opposed to that. It's awful. I am against killing anybody, actually, and especially foreign government. Okay. I'm asking about your allegation and the Prime Minister of Israel's allegation that Iran is trying to murder the president.
Killing terrorists is a good thing. Killing people who are trying to murder Americans is a good thing. Because if you're America first, You want to protect America, and so killing Osama bin Laden was a fantastic
But you don't
day
really
for the
believe
world.
that they're trying to murder Trump, or you?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Then why aren't you calling for military action against Tehran right now?
Because they're not very effective. In terms of hitmen, their hitmen are not very effective. I do think...
So they're hitmen, but not the bad kind, the efficient kind?
No,
what are you
just
saying?
They're a weak country who is on its knees, and I think we need to...
Then why are we so afraid of them? Why are they the biggest threat if they're a weak country that's on its knees?
Because they're trying...
I'm trying to keep track.
They're trying to develop... Be a little less snarky.
I know, you're right. That is a problem that I have. I'm sorry.
They're trying to develop nuclear weapons. They are close to developing nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I can't tell if he's being genuine or not. I can't find a genuine bone in Tucker Carlson's body.
And even a weak country with a nuclear weapon. Look, I believe there is a very real possibility if the Ayatollah develops a nuclear weapon that he would detonate it either in Tel Aviv or New York or Los Angeles. And that would be
honestly, I am not looking forward to the Ukraine section. Honestly, I'm not. How long is it? Oh my God, it's 12 minutes. That physically hurt finding out that information. I thought it was gonna be like 5 minutes. Oh my God. Okay.
Catastrophic. And
That's
I don't
for
know what the
sure.
chances are of that. Let me compare and contrast Iran to North Korea.
Wait, can I just ask one last question about trying to
You
kill
can ask
the
any-
president? You sincerely believe, you promise, that right now the Iranian government is trying to murder our
Yes.
president.
Yes.
You sincerely believe right now.
Absolutely.
And yet you are not calling for military action against the government that's trying to murder our president. Can you explain that?
I don't think they're very effective. I do think we should, by the way, America is
You're willing to take that risk?
I think we should protect the president and we should take out our enemies.
Well, aren't
Israel is doing that right now.
But aren't they? Why would we outsource
And by
it to
the way,
Israel if
your
they're
first
trying
question
to?
was, why
would
are
we
you
have
for
Israel
regime
do it?
change? That's a pretty good example of why I'm for regime change.
Okay, so you're saying we should just go in and take out the government of Iran. Why
No.
would we outsource it to Israel if they're trying to murder our president?
Okay.
You sound like the isolationist.
What I'm saying on any military judgment is there needs to be a cost-benefit analysis of what are the risks versus what are the benefits. In this instance, I think it is enormously in America's interest to do what Israel is doing right now: take out Iran's senior military leadership and take out their nuclear capacity. That is benefiting America, and it is a good risk-reward. I would oppose invading Iran and putting boots on the ground to topple the government. If the risk got severe enough, I would support that, but I think the relative risk is not severe enough to justify that step at this time. What I would absolutely oppose under any circumstances is invading Iran and then staying and trying to turn them into a democracy. And part of where Iraq really went off the rails is not only did we topple someone who was fighting radical Islamic terrorists, who was a bad guy, but then we tried the vision of interventionists. It actually overlaps with the vision of a lot of Democrats. Let's go promote democracy in the world.
I agree.
And it is our military's job to kill the bad guys, to defend America. It's not their job to defend international norms. It's not their job. So I have zero desire for the U.S. military to turn around.
International norms protect the United States. I mean, it depends on which norm, whether or not it's our responsibility to go uphold it in every instance. But the idea that like norms don't help us, I mean, they do. But when it comes to the Iranians, I mean, if we were to overthrow the government, are we then accepting that it could be like a Libya-style situation? That it could be like a divided state, like an ongoing civil war that can go on for who knows how long, like depending upon like whatever factor, and could be really destabilized. And like, what does that mean for the region? What does that mean for the Strait of Hormuz? As we can see that the Houthis have become a major problem for the Gulf of Aden. All I'm saying is, like, I understand the idea of like the John Bolton strategy of kicking the door, kill what you need to kill, and then drop the Constitution and leave. But I do think that, you know, trying to provide some amount of stability, not necessarily signing yourself up to a 20-year nation building project, but trying to establish some amount of stability makes it so, you know, you won't have to come in and do the same job again.
And into Switzerland. Look, would it be nice if they suddenly became Switzerland? Sure. If I could wave a magic wand, great. But I'm not going to send your kids or my kids to be in front of guns to go make that happen.
Well, bless you for that. I think that is the lesson that I learned from Iraq. I promoted that war. Apparently, unlike you, I was dumber. And I think that you just articulated the main lesson of it, which is it's hard to do that, and we're not good at it. But
I will, and so we are agreeing on that. I will say as a corollary,
vehemently agreeing.
As a corollary, that doesn't mean that horrible, evil dictators are okay. And going back to Reagan and the Cold War, we have lots of weapons. I am happy to highlight the brutality, the oppression, the human rights abuses of regimes, even though I don't want to invade them, because I think the bully pulpit of American leadership is really powerful. And I think dictatorships are terrified. So I've spent 13 years in the Senate. One of the things I do frequently is highlight dissidents in Iran and North Korea and China, in Venezuela. People are being tortured. Miriam Ibrahim in Sudan, who was sentenced to 100 lashes and then to be killed for the crime of being a Christian. And I repeatedly went to the Senate floor and shined a light on the government of Sudan. It was corrupt. It was evil. I practically begged Barack Obama, say her name. Ultimately,
I felt that way with the J6 prisoners. Yeah.
Look, yes. Look, there is power to speaking out. And
Well, which one? The one that had a shootout with police and got killed, or the one that's lawyers are currently arguing in court that the pardon Trump gave out also covered his child pornography charges, or the ones that assaulted cops to the point that they lost like fingers and some were permanently disabled? Like which ones do we need to say the names of?
Ultimately, the international Obama never did say her name. He would not say her name. Ultimately, there was enough international condemnation. The government of Sudan let her go. And so she was not executed. And I met her. So she had a 2-year-old son, Martin, and she gave birth to a little girl named Maya. And she was in leg irons in prison waiting for the death sentence. They were not going to kill her until she gave birth. And they told her, we will not kill you if you will renounce Jesus. And she refused. And I met her. She was in D.C. speaking at a conference after she was released, obviously. And I asked her, she's a tiny woman, very small woman. I asked her, I said, when you were in that prison cell with your kids, how did you have the strength not to just give in to despair? I mean, I've never been threatened with murder unless I renounce my faith. And she just said to me with a real peacefulness, she said, Jesus was with me. And thankfully, you and I have not faced that circumstance. But I do think there is a responsibility.
There's still time.
There is, and I hope we don't. And actually, I'll use another example. John McCain, who you and I...
Okay, I'm tapping out. I'm tapping out. What happens next for Iran? I don't need to hear another story.
And Hilton and I...
Oh, wow.
I agree with you about McCain. I just want to end by asking you specifically about what's going to happen next in Iran and what should happen next. So you've called for regime change. You said you don't favor the U.S. military participating in any kind of regime change. You said you don't think, and bless you for saying this, that the U.S. military should try and turn it into Belgium.
Yeah.
Thank God. But there is a third option where it turns into Syria, where it's this open wound and it causes massive migration and further destroys Europe, as Syria has.
Yeah.
And that's a huge cost, and where lots of people die and religious minorities get murdered in Syria again. Are you worried about that?
Sure. And listen, that lots of bad things can happen. But going back to what we talked about, the principle of defending America, I agree with President Trump that Iran with a nuclear weapon is an unacceptable risk to America, and we need to stop it. I agree with President Trump, and I'll make a point.
But he's not for regime change.
He's not. So he and I disagree. Yeah, look, I think he thinks it would be better. He has not said he's for it. And you know what? Look, it is consequential when the President of the United States says, I'm for regime change. So I understand why he hasn't. What he has said is he's drawn a red line and said, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and the only acceptable outcome is complete dismantlement. So they have centrifuges. They're enriching uranium right now. They're trying to develop a nuclear weapon. He said they must have complete dismantlement. I led 52 senators, Republican senators, in a letter where we said we agree with President Trump. That's the red line, complete dismantlement. I agree with President Trump. I agree with him supporting Israel, taking out Iran's military leadership, taking out their nuclear capability. And I'll point out, look, if you look the first term, I am hard-pressed to think of a single foreign policy decision Donald Trump made the first term that I disagree with. And that's not entirely accidental, because I spent a lot of time the first term in the Oval Office with him. And what happened in the first term often is you would have in the administration, you had interventionists in the administration, you had isolationists, and they disagreed. They would fight within the administration. And often what it would give is an opportunity for me to come in and say, hey, there's a middle path here that President Trump agreed with frequently. And it's worth noting, in the first term, he most assuredly was not an isolationist. Look, he took out General Soleimani, which I emphatically agree with. And in fact, I introduced a resolution that we voted on the Senate floor commending him for taking out General Soleimani, who was the leader of the IRGC and who was responsible for killing over 600 American servicemen and women. When Trump came in, ISIS had a caliphate that had grown up under Obama that was about the size of the state of Indiana. And Trump came in and utterly decimated.
Honestly, I think I'm done with the Iranian section. I don't know what else they could possibly say about Iran. They've argued about it for so long. Can we just skip? Oh no, he says Cruz knows nothing about Iran and wants to destroy it anyway. He talks about, oh god, oh gosh, that's a pretty big the moment. I saw it on Twitter, so I think I'll skip to that. But I'm not doing 2 hours. I'm looking at the clock and I'm seeing it run out, and I've decided that I love myself too much. The dude is either young or high and bored. No, dude, I'm just bored. It's been an hour of I don't need to hear another soliloquy. Okay, I'll just move to the stuff that is interesting from the end of the Iran conversation.
Have fallen. I would use economic sanctions and I would use moral suasion to try to effectuate.
But if you
regime
topple,
change.
okay, so you topple the regime by whatever means, what happens then? How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
90 something, maybe 94, 93, 95, something like that.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay.
I was off. I said 95. Cancel me now. Cancel me now. Throw me out into the wild and beat me with sticks till I stop breathing. I have spread a misinformation.
Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because,
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay,
it's not even... You don't know anything about Iran, so
okay,
actually...
I don't know if the percentage of the ethnic makeup off the top of your head is a look. I think he should be able to say like the Kurds and stuff. You know, he should be able to like say a few of the ethnic groups that make up Iran. But the percentage of the ethnic groups, I can't tell you what percentage of, I mean, like what, 13% maybe? What percentage of Iran is Kurdish? Like I can't, like, I don't know that off the top of my head. 10%. Oh, I was only off by 3. Okay, well, but I mean, like, being able to say that, but knowing the population off the top of your head, like, you have a rough estimate, yeah. But I don't know how much this, like, pop quizzing stuff, like, it's kind of like the weakest dunk you could have. If it was, for example, if it was something like, who's the Ayatollah? Or, you know, something like that, where it's like a very basic question. For example, if I'm talking to somebody and they can't tell me who like Dmitry Medvedev is, but they're trying to talk like they're an expert on Russia, then I'm gonna be like, okay, I'm not gonna take you seriously. If you can't even remember the last person who was president of Russia, then obviously, then I don't think you really care all that much. But I don't know if like if he said 85 or 80, if he said like 80 something million, like would have been like, oh, you're off by 10. That's, you know, if he said the number, would it have just moved on to like until you found like a pop quiz thing he didn't know? Like on one, this is almost like the perfect attack avenue for me because it's totally cheesing it. So it's funny. This is a great freeze frame, by the way, for Ted. So it's fun to watch Ted react to a cheese, but also I walk away with still a poor opinion of Tucker because it's like this is, I don't know if this is particularly the questions, you know, I would lead with. It's shady.
I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that,
we're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
Well, you just said we were.
We are supporting
this is
Israel.
High stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay, we are not bombing them.
Oh, okay.
Israel is bombing them. And hey, why do you do the snide? Oh, okay.
What do you mean? Because this is super high stakes stuff. This is a huge country that borders a lot of other important countries. A lot of the world's energy comes from there.
So
let me
you
ask
don't
want another disaster. You don't want to be
Tucker,
reckless.
the Ayatollah refers to Israel as the little Satan and America as the great Satan. Do you believe him when he says it's the great Satan? Do you think if the Ayatollah could murder both of us right now that he would? I do. I believe him.
Okay, I assume no good faith on the part of the Ayatollah.
No, not
and
good
if your
faith.
implication is like I'm pro-Ayatollah or something.
No, it's not good faith. It's that.
Just saying, you're a lawmaker. You're a powerful person in Washington. This is the most powerful country in the world. If you're calling for toppling in government, it's incumbent on you to know something about the country and to think through the consequences of that. And you haven't, and you don't. And I'm saying that's reckless.
There couldn't be a worse advocate for this specific point, considering Tucker Carlson speaks about shit he doesn't understand all the time with authority. Like interviewing that guy, this guy who smokes crack told me he sucked off Obama. Let me give him an hour-long interview. A real thing that happened on the Tucker Carlson program. So it's just like, man, I just can't take it seriously from him. Like the pop quizzes. Like if I started pop quizzing him on Ukraine when he's talking about Ukraine like authoritatively as like it was a horrible thing that we went to support them. Like, do you think you could answer any basic questions about like the Rada? Or about, you know, Ukrainian religious society, if he's going to talk about the oppression of Christians in Ukraine or whatever? No.
You are...
But this is why this is beautiful. You're just watching them both self-destruct.
You engage in reckless rhetoric with no facts. And to be clear...
I'm not calling for the overthrow of a government. You
put out a newsletter attacking Donald Trump and calling him complicit.
I've never attacked Donald Trump.
Yes, you have.
You disrespected dear leader. I would never disrespect dear leader. I would never. How dare you? Yes, you did. You disrespected dear leader.
Campaigned for Donald Trump.
Okay, yes.
And this is after anti-Semitism, this is the last refuge. You're an anti-Semite and you hate Trump.
Okay,
I love Trump.
I will read. You put out a whole newsletter saying Trump has abandoned America first. And here's what Trump said in response.
Wow, look at that. Ted Cruz came prepared with a letter and everything. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, considering that I'm the one that developed America first and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one who decides that. For those people who say they want peace, you can't have peace if Iran has a nuclear weapon. So for all of those wonderful people who don't want to do anything about Iran having a nuclear weapon, that's not peace. That was directed at you.
Man, you got me. Busted.
No, I'm just saying.
Look, my views, look, I like Trump. I campaigned for Trump. I know Trump. I talked to him last night. I'm not against Trump, and you know that.
But you're against his foreign policy.
I think that we should be very careful about entering into more foreign wars that don't help us when our country is dying.
When you say
and our
don't
country
help
is
us,
dying.
Look, yes, focus on our country. I'm all for it. But the naivete.
You don't even know how much money this costs. You don't know anything about the country whose government you want to overthrow, and you're calling me reckless.
I want to stop a lunatic who wants to murder us from getting nuclear weapons that could kill millions of Americans.
Fair.
You say, I can't see how that benefits America in any way. That is bizarre. And by the way,
bizarre.
Isolationism, your foreign policy is the foreign policy of Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama.
Oh, absolutely.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm a big leftist. This is so silly. I'm Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. Okay.
Jimmy Carter, the leftist.
Let me just say one last thing.
So how is your foreign policy different from Jimmy Carter's? Seriously.
Please.
I asked that question seriously.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Do you think Tucker Carlson knows anything about the Carter administration? I'm genuinely curious.
Jimmy Carter?
So
what century is this? I am the product of the last 25 years, watching carefully, being involved in the periphery.
Well, that's my answer then.
And I see an unending string of foreign policy disasters that have impoverished.
Why did he call Jimmy Carter leftist?
And hurt our country.
Unending string.
An unending string. They would include Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and our inability to stop the Houthis, by the way, in Yemen, which exposes us as weak, and I grieve over that. So these are failures. You helped preside over some of them as a member of the Senate.
What failures, foreign policy failures, have I presided over?
Well, we were
none of the ones you just listed. Kind of a troubled area. So now we're just gonna move over to Ukraine, aren't we?
We're unable to beat Russia in the war.
There we go.
That you supported against Russia. You've been spending the last 3 years telling us that Vladimir Putin is evil and we're going to beat him with other people's children, and 1 million of those kids are now dead. You've never apologized for that. That was a full failure.
By the way, look.
Why is he so limp-wristed and whiny about it? Killing them with other people's kids. You see how he talks about the Ukrainians as if he has sympathy for them, but then talks about them as if they're a puppet people. We're both, oh, why you weep for them, those dumb puppets getting dragged through the meat grinder, fighting for Ted Cruz, actually. They're all like, when I was with Azov, you know what they said? Slava Ukraini, Heram Slava, hail Ted Cruz, and they ran straight into the machine gun fire. I mean, why did you apologize for supporting Ukraine? By the way, when you say defeating Russia, the goal was to stop Ukraine from collapsing. That was the immediate goal of Ukraine aid. The Joe Biden administration did not think that they were going to expel the Russians from Crimea. They never had that perception. Neither did Ted Cruz or probably anyone else on the Hill. I remember the start of the war when Tucker Carlson and the rest of them, everybody thought that Ukraine was going to collapse in 3 weeks, and it didn't. That outcome was avoided. And since then, the Russians have been unable to compromise, and Tucker Carlson's position has been, we got to sit down and negotiate. Negotiate what? Well, I assume since Tucker Carlson goes to Moscow, produced their propaganda for them, sniffs the bread through the plastic wrap, he's such a cartoonish propagandist. Let me show you this. I was talking about this earlier today. I have it on standby because we were talking about how ridiculous this was with friends. Look at this. This is him sniffing bread in a Moscow supermarket through the plastic wrap. It's the cheapest bread you can get off the shelf, and he basically moans into it. As if he's just found, as if it's prom night and she just dropped the dress. And he can't even sniff it. He's sniffing it through the plastic wrap. It's pure propaganda. And so from that perspective, it's quite easy to see how someone like Tucker Carlson can talk about the Ukrainians as if, what they want don't matter, or to continue to talk about the Russians as if they're willing to compromise on anything. Like, I mean, even Trump is like, of course, we're not going to ask the Ukrainians to demilitarize. Of course, we're not going to, make the Ukrainians like give up a bunch of land they don't even have. Like Trump acknowledges that the Russian demands on their face are ridiculous. Like in the same Trump that's do nothing Trump on Ukraine. But Tucker is still in this fantasy land where the Russian demands are just so unbelievably reasonable. But during his interview with Putin, the whole time he had this just befuddled look on his face because he was baffled that Putin didn't take his time in his interview with Tucker Carlson to talk about the transes or the woke or how the gays or this or that. And every time Tucker Carlson tried to drag it over to that, Putin would drag it back to him just like, no, you don't understand. I don't want to talk about the gays. So Prince Yaroslav Horst took a dump in Kiev, therefore we conquer. Like it's like he's still living in this land where he can go back to Russia, you know, take the tour, make the, you know, consumer product, make the little documentary that I can give to his people and say, hey, you know, authoritarianism doesn't really matter. Corruption doesn't really matter. Embrace the swamp, become the swamp, which was the end of his little segment in Russia. I gotta show you guys this again. I gotta show you the end of this because it really is like Orwellian in nature. The way he ends this. He goes into a supermarket. He's like, "Whoa, they have stale bread. Whoa!" And he's like pogging and he's like high-fiving. And then he ends it with this honestly scary little rant. Like deranged, like anti-American, to be frank, rant. Listen to this.
Here's from the United States by grocery.
Oh yeah, and then he's like, "Whoa, food here so cheap. Oh my gosh, this would have cost so much more in the United States," having no frame of reference at all for what the cost of living in Russia is or how much people get paid. He's completely relying on the ignorance of the American viewer.
And we didn't pay any attention to costs as we were just putting in the cart what we would actually eat over a week. And we all came in around $400, about $400.
Listen to this music in the background. He's about to drop some truth bombs.
It was $104 US here. And that's when you start to realize that ideology maybe doesn't matter as much as you thought.
Ideology doesn't matter whether you believe in liberal democracy or you think liberal democracy is degenerate and must be smashed in the name of the, you know, what does that matter? Mind you, again, what convinced him that liberal democracy maybe doesn't matter? You know, maybe values and belief, you know, maybe none of that matters. What was it that convinced him? The grocery bill that to an average Russian would be pretty expensive because they don't get paid the same wages we get paid here. Like, it does not cost the same to live in Russia as it does. And he's in a major metropolitan area. People in the countryside tend to get paid even less, but it costs a lot less to live in Russia than it does to live in the United States because they get paid less. The labor costs are less. The Russians make less money, and therefore they have less money to spend. I mean, like, let me look at like the average Russian salary. Average Russian monthly salary, just to give you an idea. 2 USD. $787. Roughly $700. It says other sources can go up to 787. Let's go up with the highest number in $787. Do you think having that information that somebody's making $700 a month might be important when talking about that grocery bill? Instead of assuming that you're making, what, 5, 4,000, 6,000, whatever it is? Reminder, Tucker Carlson comes from the Swanson family fortune. So this guy already is going to have his entire perception of what is and isn't affordable warped from the start. And now he's using this warped perception and the Americans' lack of knowledge of how much it costs to actually live in Russia in order to tell people ideology doesn't matter. What do people believe? Democracy, not democracy?
Thought, corruption. Corruption
doesn't matter. Again, warrior against the swamp, warrior against the deep state. Corruption doesn't matter here. Look at the grocery bill. That's still expensive for a Russian.
Take people's standard of living and you tank it through filth and crime and inflation, and they literally can't buy the groceries they want. that point, maybe it matters less what you say or whether you're a good person or a bad person. You're wrecking people's lives in their country, and that's what our leaders have done to us. And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders. That's how I feel anyway, radicalized.
Radicalized.
The level of number of falsehoods you lay out just in one statement are rather
You haven't
stunning.
supported the war against Russia?
Are rather stunning. So the war against Russia was caused, which I have explained at great detail, by Joe Biden's weakness.
But you
Instead of getting in the trenches and going to town with Tucker, like, let me get in there and defend. Nah, I mean, let's just to be clear. Let's see if I can get out of here the safe route. Let me just drive by Joe Biden quick on the issue. It was Joe Biden that caused it. Okay, sure.
It was
supported the war.
If you want to talk, we can talk Russia and Ukraine. I'm happy to talk about it.
Do you think that's been a success?
No, it's been an absolute disaster.
Okay, but you supported it. Shouldn't you apologize?
What does that mean? It's been a disaster? What has been a disaster? Would us not have doing anything been a bigger disaster? Probably. I think the disaster is we didn't do enough. And therefore, when you kind of give a middling amount of support, then you get a middling result.
No, you should apologize. I'm not going to engage in the demanding of apologies. So
I'm like, that's my point. Is all these failures and no one ever says I'm sorry.
Matter, or do you just throw out like if you want to talk, we can talk.
Okay, I do. I want to know why that seems like a true disaster for the United States. You have.
What does that mean?
It?
A disaster for the United States. What did we lose? What did we lose? What? An expanded artillery production center? What did the United States, a disaster for the United States? What, now Europe is reliant on American LNG instead of Russian natural gas? Oh, looks like the Russian exports of energy into Europe have basically stopped. And where are they getting energy now? From the United States. A disaster for the United States, or a travesty for the United States. Not a single American soldier has died. If we end up bombing the Iranians, American soldiers will likely die, right? And you're going to have to watch as these people who are saying, oh my gosh, a disaster, are going to have to make a song and dance about defending actions that could lead to the death of American soldiers, when so far, not a single American soldier has died in reference to supporting the Ukrainians. A disaster for us how? Putting aside, like, his humanitarian concerns as he does propaganda for the regime, filling up the mass graves. Like, how is it a disaster for us? We're fine. None of our problems have to do with the fact that we're not nice enough to the Russians.
Do you believe Joe Biden's weakness caused the war in Ukraine?
I think Joe Biden's aggression caused it.
His aggression? What aggression?
He demanded that Ukraine join NATO.
He didn't demand that Ukraine join NATO. What is he talking? Tucker Carlson makes up his own little fanfic of the war, says it so confidently, and then when you just tell him, no, that's not true, he just reacts befuddled. Joe Biden did not want Ukraine in NATO. Period. End of paragraph. I wish I could give him credit for something that I can't. He was of the same position of Obama. He was of the same position of Trump, I guess first term Trump. He was of the same position of everybody before them, basically, was that they didn't want to push Ukraine into NATO, both because of the frozen war in Crimea, but before that, because they didn't see it as particularly necessary. Then, with the Russians continuously invading Ukraine, that perception has changed. After the large-scale invasion in 2022, that is when the Biden administration took the position that Ukraine should be in NATO. Only after the Russians invaded Ukraine, not the first time, his position was still against NATO then, the second time. The second time. They didn't take Ukraine joining NATO off the table. That becomes, they have to be in NATO. No, that's keeping options on the table. That could mean they join NATO down the line. It could mean they don't join NATO down the line, and we compromise with the Russians. We say, look, if you want them not to be in NATO, you got to give back Crimea, or you got to do X, Y, and Z. That's diplomacy.
How does that help the United States?
It is a terrible idea, and I have vigorously opposed Ukraine joining NATO.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. So Ted Cruz's response is to be a limperist as well.
So that's what caused the war.
No, it's not.
Okay. All right.
Do you want to know what caused the war? Look, you do the dismissive. You're not actually interested in fact.
At what point in the entire Tucker Carlson has completely bought into the Russophilic narratives? Okay, he talks about Ted Cruz being bought by AIPAC, being bought by the Israeli lobby. If the Russians were handed out dough, he'd be one of the first ones in line to take it. Because if your belief is that if there was no NATO, the Russians all of a sudden would be peacemongers and their main export to Europe would be tulips and sunshine, you're a fucking Neanderthal. The Russians, for the entirety of their existence as a political entity, have always expanded westward. When haven't they?
He must have never been to a European bakery before. Now that fresh bread smell is good.
Thank you for the €6. I appreciate that. Or is it £6? No, it looks like €6. I appreciate it. Russia, if they were told there will be no collective defensive alliance to stop you from invading countries, why would the response be, I guess we're going home? Vladimir Putin had an hour-long speech at the start of the war about why Ukraine does not exist. It's not a real country. It's a fake language. They're an extension of the Ruski Mir, and it's all nonsense. And if you listen to the people around him, and if you listen to that interview you had with him, Tucker, you talked to him for an hour, and he didn't use NATO as the main justification. He used his historical ramblings. If you just paid attention to the previous conversations you had, you would see that. But Tucker Carlson must have just checked out of the conversation because Putin didn't drop soy or woke or gay or LGBT or like, hey, trans, ha 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 ha. Like, he didn't do that. And so, you checked out of the conversation. You're like Prince Rurik and, the Ruski Mir. Who cares? Like, yeah, who cares? You don't care about it, but Putin does. Putin cares a lot about it. Man, the voice breaking's rubbing off on me.
Facts. You're like, okay.
Okay, tell me, it seems super obvious. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. That is a tick of mine that is wrong, and I mean this with sincerity. I'm sorry to do that to you. I just think it seems so obvious that sending Kamala Harris to the NATO Security Conference to say you're going to join NATO is what triggered the invasion days later.
Okay, so can I...
So... when they were gathering the blood on the border, that wasn't a clear sign of what they were going to do. It was, oh, we're not going to invade. Oh, God. Harris is talking about the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. I guess we're going to invade now. And let's look this up. Harris says Ukraine join NATO 2022. Let's look it up. By the way, Harris, to this day, would not say whether or not Ukraine should join NATO. To this day, her position is, well, I don't know. Yeah. Like, my gosh. One second. I'm trying to find what he's talking about. She said she's going to join NATO, and days later, he invaded. Why would he have his armies in place? Why would he have the blood bags in place, which you don't have in place for training operations? It's not like he could just magically gather those troops on the border. Everything I'm seeing is from in March, after the invaded started on February 24th. I can't find anything on this. Here's her statements from February 18th. That's from a few days before the war. Let me read her statement. We remain, of course, open to and desirous of diplomacy as it relates to the dialogue and discussions we have had with Russia. We are also committed, if Russia takes aggressive action, to ensure that we have severe consequences in terms of sanctions. Whoa! That's basically a threat for World War III. I can't, there's nothing here. I can't find anything here on they will join NATO. Nothing. It's about, Europe must invest in defense. Ready for NATO allies on the eastern flank. All right, Article 5 is ironclad. Looks like a bunch of horse hockey to me. I can't find anything on this. Yeah, I can't find anything.
This will take a few minutes to lay out because it's.
So wait, let me find. Okay, here is the statement I think he might be talking about. Okay, here it is. Let me show you the statement that he says started the war. Vice President, let me start by saying I appreciate and admire President Zelensky's desire to join NATO. And once again, the founding principles of NATO is that each country must have the ability, unimpaired and unimpeded, to determine their own future, both in terms of their form of government and, in this case, whether they desire to become a member of NATO. He says that it's I'll put in context because the other is obvious, which is that, therefore, no other country can tell anyone whether they should join NATO. That should be their independent choice. This is the point of sovereignty. So I respect President Zelensky's desire to become a member of NATO. She said, I respect his desire to become a member of NATO. She did not say he must become a member of NATO. But the fundamental principle of NATO is that, yes, people can join it. It's a defensive collective alliance. And, you know, it defends against typically Russian aggression. But this isn't a statement that they must join NATO. It's a statement of, I respect that Zelensky just said 10 times, please let us join NATO. If anything, you could even interpret this as like, yeah, you could one day, maybe. I mean, if, you know, you have the right kind of like, maybe you could like, I don't know, like you can continue to hope. That's how I read it. I mean, it isn't like we are going to join NATO. You know, I'm starting to think Tucker Carlson could be a little disingenuous. And mind you, this statement was made on February 20th. So Tucker Carlson would need to argue that the Russians prepared a full invasion in 4 days. So, yeah, good luck with that.
Complicated, but I think the facts matter. I think two things caused the war in Ukraine. Number one, I think Biden's incredible weakness and the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, I believe we need to leave Afghanistan, but not with the incompetence that led to 13 servicemen and women being murdered by terrorists there. The way Biden did that was disastrous, and I think our enemies looked to the commander-in-chief and said, this president is weak. And when that withdrawal was so disastrous, I said publicly at the time, the chances of Putin invading Ukraine have just risen tenfold.
Right.
But secondly, and this is critically important.
Well, I agree. That was awful, the withdrawal.
And it was a major cause of our enemies all said, hey, this president is weak. And so it invited. And by the way, look, I
am the anti-interventionist. And let me just make sure I'm going to go out of my way to continue to critique the president that actually made the decision that we're going to pull out of Afghanistan. The commentary online will never forgive Joe Biden. Never ever forgive him for pulling out of Afghanistan.
I despise war, and I think weakness and isolationism.
Man, it's terrible, these interventionists. My gosh, can you believe what they're doing in Ukraine? Anyway, pulling out of Afghanistan. What a disaster. What a terrible thing. Anyway, back to these horrible interventionists.
Produces war. Because it invites aggression from our bad guys. It's why I agree with Ronald Reagan's peace through strength. The best way you avoid war is being strong enough that your enemies don't want to mess with you. But let's get back to Ukraine and Russia. Look, Putin didn't wake up 2 years ago and decided he wanted to invade Ukraine. He's wanted to invade Ukraine for decades. Putin has referred to the collapse of the Soviet Union as, quote, the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. And Putin has long been explicit. His desire is to reassemble the old Soviet Union and, in fact, reassemble the Russian Empire that was even bigger than that. If you want to reassemble the Soviet Union, the natural place to start is Ukraine.
Do you really believe that Putin has territorial designs on Eastern Europe?
Yes.
What countries?
He has said that you can go.
Moldova. That's a good place to start.
Is an immoral, morally corrupt
Moldova. I mean, he explicitly said at the start of the invasion, he laid out a principle that would basically make it so any post-Soviet state he believes belongs in his sphere of influence, if not territorially within Russia, then within their sphere of influence. The justifications by which they invaded at the start, when they thought this was going to go quick and easy, was a justification that could have been easily extended to nation states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which the Russians have been demanding NATO pull out of for a while, and has recently been reiterated by Russian negotiators. The Grain Man, thank you for the primer.
Go and read his speech. Hold on. I don't want to lose.
Yes, Ted. Yeah, tell him to read his speech from the start of the war.
The narrative of what happened. So we can go back and do that, but I don't want to lose telling the story first. So let me explain this, and then if you want to go back, we can take all sorts of digressions, but just give me a couple of minutes to lay out the facts of what happened. He has wanted to invade Ukraine a long time, and he's done it before. In 2014, he invaded Ukraine, invaded Crimea. When Barack Obama was president, he invaded the southern portion. He did not invade the rest of the country. Why? And the reason is the principal source of revenue for Russia is oil and gas, and the natural gas pipelines run right through the country of Ukraine, and he didn't want to jeopardize his ability to get gas to Europe.
Right.
So in 2015, Putin started a project called Nord Stream 2.
Did anything happen in 2014?
In terms of
The CIA, Maidan, coup, these tired, drawn out, I'm sorry, man, to tell you all, but before in advance, because I don't want to have to pause it again after he says it, but the Ukrainians overthrew their government, did their revolution, not because Victoria Nuland told them, or because they read a bunch of liberal pamphlets, but because the Berkut was brutal. The government went back on its promises it made on the campaign trail about the association agreement. They pulled out of it in the middle of the night, trying to suppress protests, which people did not appreciate. And then they hired gangs to help them suppress the protests. I'm sure if Joe Biden hired MS-13 to go put down a protest of pro-gun Americans, Tucker Carlson's response would not be, well, we need to respond to this very acutely and, very reservedly, and we should all go home.
What? Wasn't there a coup in Ukraine?
Out of the park.
Run by the Obama administration?
let me finish telling that. I told
Ted, you can't let him just. I don't care if you think you're just establishing a story here. You just got to say, no, that isn't true. Because Tucker says it confidently. You don't confront him, and his audience just assumes it's true, Ted. Oh, Teddy boy. Teddy boy.
told you, we'll take lots of digressions in a second. Let me finish telling the...
By the way, let me just say, you put one person in that room with Tucker who knows what they're talking about and has a little bite in him, Tucker won't survive, and he won't release the interview.
The narrative. 2015, Putin began building Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 is an undersea pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany. The entire purpose of Nord Stream 2 is when it was completed and turned on, it would let Russia circumvent Ukraine and get its gas straight to Europe. In 2019, Nord Stream 2 was almost complete. And the conventional wisdom in Washington was, this is terrible, but there's nothing we can do about it. I didn't believe that. So I drafted sanctions legislation that was targeted to stop the pipeline. My legislation passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support. It passed the House, and Donald Trump signed it into law.
Can I just ask, why wouldn't you want Germany to have cheap energy?
Because it empowers Russia. And I believe in making our enemies weaker and our friends stronger.
Has blowing up Nord Stream made Germany stronger?
Not being dependent on Russia has made Germany stronger.
Just you think Germany is stronger now than it was 4 years ago?
I think.
With the investments and expansion in Rheinmetall, and I mean, Like, in what capacity? If we're talking militarily, I mean, that's almost certainly true. If we're talking about like self-reliance, if that's a standard to even be had, like, yeah, the energy sources they're getting are from people who are not considered geopolitical opponents. If we're talking about economically, Germany has a lot of economic problems. A lot of them have to do with decaying infrastructure. This is something that they've been complaining about. But now that the debt cap has been lifted for defense spending and like aid to Ukraine and infrastructure, we can expect some real investments there. But I mean, the economic problems Germany is facing, I don't know how much of it really has to do with the Russians, and a lot more of it has to do with the dominance of the Chinese EV market and the competition it's providing for German auto manufacturers and certain demographic problems, stuff that would have been, you know, a problem irrespective of whether or not they continue to get Russian gas. Sure, cheaper gas is always like, it's cheaper gas at the end of the day. But if that cheaper gas can be leveraged over you as a diplomatic tool, there might be a motivation to diversify your energy intake.
Think not being dependent on Russia. Germany has all sorts of problems, and many of them are domestic to their own politics. Hold on, let me finish. I'm trying to...
No, but what you're saying, it doesn't... Germany seems so much weaker now that its energy costs have spiked and the manufacturing sector is collapsing because of that.
That's the reason the manufacturing sector is collapsing? Okay.
Let me finish. I'm focused...
That's why the automakers are going under?
...on America's interest.
I would love to... I think the Germans would love to hear that.
I don't want Russia stronger because I believe Russia is our enemy. You and I disagree on that. We can talk about that. But I want our enemies weaker. I don't want to go to war with Russia, but I want our enemies weaker. I don't want Europe dependent on Russia. I don't want Putin rich with oil and gas revenues and able to invest in his...
See, the problem with Ted here is he's assuming that Tucker also sees Russia as an enemy.
...military and pose a threat to America. So, the sanctions legislation that I authored, it passed. Putin stopped building Nord Stream 2 literally the day that President Trump signed my sanctions legislation into law. He signed it, if I remember right, at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Putin stopped construction at 6:45 p.m. So the sanctions legislation worked, and it killed the pipeline. The pipeline lay dormant for over a year, just a hunk of metal at the bottom of the ocean. Joe Biden came into office. He was sworn in on January 20th, 2021. Putin resumed deep-sea construction of Nord Stream 2 4 days later, January 24th. He did so because Biden had foreshadowed weakness on this issue. That foreshadowing was accurate because several months later, Biden formally waived the sanctions on Nord Stream 2 and let Putin complete the pipeline. In January of 2022, I forced a vote on the Senate floor to reimpose sanctions on Nord Stream 2. The week of the vote, President Zelensky and Ukraine...
I understand his, like, Ted Cruz is more interested in getting across the partisan point that this was all Biden's fault, which, of course, I've said time and time again that it's a combination of bipartisan failure from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden. Like, I have flack for everybody. But he's more interested in getting across this partisan point than pushing back against any of the nonsense that Tucker's just thrown out there. And so it just gets to stand without opposition.
Ukraine publicly called on the Senate, please pass this sanctions legislation. It is the last best hope of stopping Russia from invading Ukraine. At the same time, the government of Poland put out a formal statement from the foreign ministry to the Senate, calling on the Senate to pass my sanctions legislation, and said, if you do not, Putin will invade Ukraine. The day of the vote, Joe Biden came to Capitol Hill. It's the first time in his presidency he had done that. He went to the Democrat senators' lunch, and he personally lobbied them on this issue, not any other issue. This was his number one issue that he came to lobby them on. They came out of that lunch. Every Democrat had voted with me twice against Nord Stream 2. 44 Democrats flipped their vote. They voted in favor of Russia, in favor of Putin, and 4 weeks later, Russia invaded Ukraine.
I do agree that was a failure for the Democrats. I can at least agree with that.
That was the direct...
Now, can you go push back against what Tucker said, or are we just going to move on?
...cause of the war, and if Trump had been president, there would be no war in Ukraine.
So, may I ask, I, of course, disagree with your analysis completely, but I want to be respectful.
Okay, so tell me what you disagree with.
it's such a long conversation. I've spent the last couple of years on this, and I just respectfully disagree with your
Okay, sure, Tucker.
analysis.
He's really dug into the weeds to figure out that it's all NATO, and without NATO, Russia would just like be frolicking in the fields.
Don't doubt your sincerity that you believe that Putin is our enemy, that Western Europe should not be allowed to use Russian energy. I mean, you seem to really believe these things. My question is about results, because I think it's relevant to what we're seeing now in Iran. You look back after having you personally voted to send billions and billions and billions of U.S. tax dollars to Zelensky to support his civil service in the war against Russia and all this stuff. Can you say that what you did worked?
Absolutely. I mean, it worked as much as we put in. You know, you put in the half a tank of gas, you get half a tank out. You put in a full tank of gas, you get a full tank out. You put in enough to stop the Russians from taking over the country. And let me just say, Russia right now is a threat to European security. If Russia had Belarus and all of Ukraine with Ukraine's defense industry, and now with its domestically produced drone industry and its know-how, that'd be an even bigger threat. Russia's got a lot of demographic issues that kind of disincentivize the conquering of other nations, but the high casualty of the Tuvan population and other people in, you know, the more minority regions of Russia indicate to me that they're perfectly willing to use the people in the, as Russia would call, the borderlands, so to speak, to continue to conquer, to continue to move forward. So, I mean, like, it succeeded as far as we put into it. It succeeded as far as we said, we don't want this to get too out of control. It succeeded as far as that. If your measurement for success was throwing the Russians out of Crimea, well, then no, it hasn't been a success. If your measurement for success was bringing a quick end to the war, well, then no, it wasn't a success. But it's also in large part because the Russians have been completely unable to compromise. And for Tucker to embrace the disrespect of Donald Trump from the Russians, disrespecting his ceasefire proposals, disrespecting 3 of his 2-week deadlines, disrespecting his civilian ceasefire by bombing Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. I mean, we're clearly watched the Shaheeds. I see them out my window. Wow, boom, straight into no interception into apartment blocks. That's not even to talk about the human safari or the other instances of the civilian ceasefire being violated, or the immediate violation of the energy ceasefire. Like, at some point, you got to stop playing patty cake with those who are making a fool of the United States. At a certain point, if you're an America firster, you got to, like, say, okay, you know what, I've stuck my neck out too much for the Russians here. You know, I said that corruption doesn't matter for them. I said that ideology doesn't matter. And then I'm going to argue against degenerate leftism. I'm sorry, you said ideology doesn't matter. None of that matters. All that matters is that the grocery prices are low, at least to your grocery prices, not to the people who actually live in that community. Hey, guys, I went to West Virginia and the rent was really cheap. I don't know what people complain about with high rent in the United States. Like, anyone in America would see the problem with that statement. But when he goes into Russia and produces that propaganda, I'm supposed to take him seriously?
So I can say what I did personally, sanctioning Nord Stream 2 worked and prevented a war. And if Trump had still been there, if the sanction had been in effect, there would be no war. I'm in favor of avoiding wars.
But once the war broke out, you voted to fund it to the tune of billions and billions and billions.
And to be clear,
and did that work?
Okay, to be clear, what I voted for
depends on the objective. But I mean, Tucker doesn't have like the ability to. He doesn't know the word nuance. He couldn't spell it. He couldn't say it.
I voted for the initial tranche of funding, and then I voted against the subsequent one. So it hasn't worked. So I've been in between.
You limp wrist.
Haven't been on the full Ukraine.
Please. I don't like Ukraine, really. Look, I'll abandon my values for you. I'll abandon my values. Please. Oh, come on. Forgive. Dude, come on, man. Have a spine. He hasn't said a single accurate. The reason the Russians invaded was the statement Harris made 4 days before they invaded. Oh, the real problem of all of this was NATO expansion. If it wasn't for that, the Russians never would have invaded. Like, come on, Ted. You don't need to bend over backwards. If you're willing to say, Why are you talking about the Jews? Immediately once you get that pressure on the AIPAC stuff, why is it that you're willing to bend backwards now to make room for his anti-Ukraine hysteria?
Full-throated hawk side or the anti from day one. I voted for the initial tranche of funding because I wanted Russia to lose. I think the Biden administration administered it in a horrible way. I think they wasted a ton of money. And I think what they did was actually incoherent because they were funding both sides of the war. I was very vocal and among other things, flooding $100 million to Iran, which was used, among other things, to help the nuclear program, but also to make drones that Russia used to fight.
So here's my concern. I'm not going to defend the Biden administration. Really did a lot to wreck the United States.
Yeah, did the most damaging administration
at the end,
in history.
where we sit now, Russia is stronger. It's closely allied long-term with China.
Really? Russia, stronger in what way? Like they're producing more shells than they did before. Their economy's weaker. Their demographic situation is weaker. Like what stronger at the start of 2024. I keep throwing the statistic out there, but I want everyone to know it. At the start of 2024, the average age of a Russian volunteer was 40. Mid 2024, it was 45. End of 2024, it was 50 years old. That is a demographic problem brought about by the war and post-Soviet birth collapse. Their cannibalization of the commercial banking sector to fund the war means bad things for the Russian economy in the long run. The other impacts of the Russian economy when it comes to cost of living, the lack of being able to invest in infrastructure and public services, the lack of being able to inflation adjust when it comes to people's pensions or stuff that they need to survive. Like these are not the signs of a state that is growing in strength. You cannot tell me that by the end of the Vietnam War, the United States was in a stronger position than at the other side before the Vietnam War when it comes to impact. And we're talking about a size of death and destruction that is much larger for the invader, for the Russians, than we're going to be talking about with our troops supporting the South Vietnamese. So it's stronger in what way? Stronger in the way that they've burnt through all of their Soviet reserves. So, now they have to make new gear. Like, is that how they're stronger? I mean, how do you look at a country that had a bragging rights of having the largest armor reserves in the world, and they've burnt through the majority of those armor reserves, and you say they're in a better position now? We see their strategic bomber fleet getting blown up by drones on social media. They lose 15 to 20% of them in 2 hours, and you look at me and say they're in a better position now than they were before the war when they had 180,000 professional-ish soldiers invading the country that had experience, and not 50-year-old pensioners, 60-year-old, like going near 60. Like that's like, it's one thing to say like production has picked up, but that's not an endless furnace. My goodness.
I don't know that Russia's stronger. I don't think that's right.
Okay. I think it's pretty obvious that it is.
Tucker will assert things, say they're so obvious. It's so obvious to everybody. It's so obvious. Never back it up, but just claim it enough. And since people feel vibes on the internet, they'll just go with it. It's one thing to say that, hey, look, the Russians are like, was the Soviet Union stronger, if we're just talking about the lands that were fought over, not the lands that were conquered, before or after World War II? When it comes to the destruction of their demographics, when it comes to the destruction of their economy, when it comes to the destruction of the land, you could say, hey, they can produce a lot of military gear. They couldn't do that endlessly. They couldn't do that endlessly all the way to conquering the United States. They couldn't. They only could go so far. As much as like at the end of the war, they could produce a lot of tanks, they could produce a lot of shells. They only go so far. You have to rest. You have to take a back seat and, process your victories. And hell, the Soviet Union by the end of World War II conquered all these countries. Russia's gotten 18% of Ukraine, going on 19%. Stronger how? I mean, then the Iraq War made the United States stronger because we produced more weapons.
But it's certainly not destroyed, and it's allied long-term with China.
Maybe.
They've been allied long term with China. That's not a change.
Look, there's no doubt Biden's foreign policy drove Russia into the arms of China, and that's concerning. They also have a long history of
Biden drove them into the arms of China? That's pre-existent.
Animosity.
Western Europe is weaker and more in debt. The United States is weaker and much more in debt.
Look,
hold on.
Oh my gosh, these are all Ukraine topics. Oh my God, dude. I'd be better served sticking my God straight into a blender.
Hold on. So you and
I are agreeing on a lot.
We're agreeing. Here's my question. Have you...
What do you mean you're agreeing? Ted, you suck. You suck so hard. You suck so hard. You will go in the trenches and you will put on brass knuckles for Israel. But then you're called to go over here and just make basic pushback on Ukraine, and your wrists stop working.
You questioned any of your previous assumptions? Did you play any role in this at all? Are you responsible at all?
Of course, and like you
like,
said...
What have you learned?
Like you said you've changed your mind.
Yeah,
I voted for the first funding of the Ukraine war, and I voted against every subsequent funding stream because it wasn't working. And I looked at what was happening and said, this is not working. And had the money been spent in an intelligent way and not wasted, and had it been successful, I might have been willing to fund more. But it
where should it have been spent, Ted? Instead, that made it so, you know, the aid packages didn't deserve your vote.
Wasn't successful, so I voted no, and the war's going to end. Look, President Trump...
He's just screaming to the populist masses now.
Willing to fund more, but it wasn't successful, so I voted no, and the war's going to end. Look, President Trump campaigned on ending the war. I think he's frustrated because Putin has been less than eager to reach a deal to end the war, but it's going to end. You're not going to see another dollar coming from Congress.
Do you think Zelensky wants to end the war?
Zelensky agreed to a unilateral 30-day ceasefire. I think he wants to end the war. I don't think he wants to end the war on Putin's terms.
I think Zelensky
has agreed to the first step. Putin won't agree to the first step. You got to take the first step.
Behaved horribly. I think his Oval Office meeting will go down.
Oh my God. Can I actually? I'm done. I don't need to listen to this shit. I thought it was a debate, and now they're just like slobbing on each other. I'm done. I'm not listening to the rest of this. It's the same stuff I've heard from Tucker over and over and over again. It's going on 6:30 a.m. here in Kiev. It is not worth it. I'd rather stick my dick in a blender. Actually, no, I'm done. My goodness. Anybody with a backbone could do better. Anybody with a backbone. Literally anyone with a backbone. I give up. Ted Cruz got on the anti-Ukraine bandwagon with everybody else. Believes nothing. I feel dirty. I do too. I thought I could get through it, but I thought it was 10 minutes, and then I saw the next 3 segments was, is Zelensky a hero? And like, oh my God. Zelensky behaved terribly. Why didn't he just get on his knees and praise Trump as the God King? Like Zelensky thanked America. He thanked Trump. The only thing he said is, look, how do you get Putin to agree to a ceasefire if he breaks all of his ceasefires? And then was immediately proved right after Trump and J.D. Vance's hissy fit. The fact that Republicans feel any confidence to bring up that Oval Office meeting when everything Zelensky said ended up being true just shows that this isn't a question of what's true or not true. This is a question of the politics of aesthetics, of making sure that at the end of the day, Trump's boots are shiny, not that the facts exactly line up. Check Cruz's Twitter. I don't care to check Cruz's Twitter. I don't care what he posted afterwards saying this or that about Iran if he's going to be a limp wrist on Ukraine. I'm just not. Like, look at all this. It's all Trump, Iran. He just sounds like he's completely gave up the latter half.
Here, by the way,
to this narrative. And this is why, because there's nobody brave within the Republican Party willing to go out there and fight on this and these avenues and make a compelling case that Republicans have the view of Ukraine that they do. Is because these are the defenders. People like Ted Cruz, which aren't defenders at all. We need a total and complete shutdown of BBLs until we can figure out what the hell is going on. Total and complete shutdown. Pride Month will be enforced. Okay. Let's continue.